We might be a small island, but we've got a big history that's still full of mysteries. So every year, hundreds of archaeologists go out hunting for clues to our forgotten past.
I have never seen anything like that.
In 2016, their discoveries have been more exciting than ever.
It's all happening now.
You little devil, Johan!
Yeah.
In this episode, Digging for Britain showcases the very best of them from the West. Each excavation was filmed as it happened by the archaeologists themselves. Their dig diaries mean that we can be there for every exciting moment of discovery.
Cracking little find.
Superb.
And now the archaeologists are bringing their finds from pottery to metalwork to human remains into our lab so that we can get a closer look at them and find out what they tell us about our British ancestors. Welcome to Digging for Britain. In this episode, we're joining archaeologists in the West as they make discoveries that will transform the history of Britain. On Jersey, a 2,000-year-old hoard of hidden treasure
It's heavy.
reveals the terror of the Roman invasion.
Oh, that is stunningly beautiful.
In Tintagel, Cornwall, an incredible Dark Age palace is uncovered at the mythical home of King Arthur. See, I'm starting to go on flights of fancy now, and to me, this is where King Arthur lived. And on Salisbury Plain, a lost map unearths hidden trenches that revolutionise our view of the First World War.
This is as if the British have captured the German trenches and then they have to dig in facing German counterattack from up the hill.
To put these revelations in context, I've come to Bristol Museum. And I've been given privileged behind-the-scenes access to see some of the archaeological treasures rarely seen by the public. But our first dig diary takes us 40 miles away to Stonehenge. "3,000 years ago, our ancestors built Stonehenge as a site of ceremony and ritual west of the River Avon. In recent years, archaeologists have come to believe that Stonehenge is just part of a vast sacred landscape full of monuments. But so far, their discoveries have mainly been to the west of the Avon. What lies to the east has largely been a mystery, until this year, when a team from Wessex Archaeology started digging at Bulford. At Bulford, just 3 miles away from Stonehenge, the discoveries were not only unexpected, they were unique, and they're helping to write a whole new chapter in the history of this archaeologically rich landscape.
Shiv this out a bit.
Phil Harding leads the team.
Hi, this is Phil Harding. I'm talking to you on the edge of Salisbury Plain, about 3 miles east of Stonehenge. That's in that direction there. And I'm working on a site here. We've been working here since, just before Christmas now. And this is really quite an exciting site. Come and have a look.
The team has uncovered something never seen in Britain before. A double henge. 2 circular banks and ditches.
So what we found are 2 previously unknown henge monuments. This is an incredible opportunity to unravel part of the ritual landscape of this part of Wiltshire, most importantly, just down the road from Stonehenge.
So what Phil really wants to find out is whether this site was in use at the same time as Stonehenge, and exactly what our Neolithic ancestors were doing here. Ground-penetrating radar reveals a series of pits just outside the double henge.
That is amazing.
Phil hopes that these will provide the evidence he needs.
An axe. Excellent.
It's a promising find.
That is absolutely gorgeous. With a blade there, just beautifully polished.
Neolithic axes were incredibly important tools used for the clearing of trees during the earliest days of farming. Putting one in a pit seems like a huge sacrifice.
There would be plenty of use left in this, and to place one of these in a pit, throw away a genuinely useful axe. Why would you do it?
As well as dozens of axe heads, mysterious chalk balls are found in the pits.
Lovely. Oh, what a gem.
These are finds that connect us to our ancestors, and for Phil, it's precious evidence of what they were doing here.
I'm sure they must have been maybe lucky mementos, maybe superstitious, maybe totemic items, some sort of votive offering to the gods, and maybe it brought them good luck.
In 1 week, 40 pits are excavated, and what's found in each one is remarkably similar.
This is an incredible collection of material. It's as though people have got a checklist and they're placing objects into the pit.
These are such enigmatic clues, glimpses of the rituals being carried out at the double henge.
Didn't want to come.
But some of the pits contain something rather different.
Now, that is what I call a bone.
It's from an aurochs,
God, look at the size of it.
a giant prehistoric cow.
The aurochs was not on the average Friday night takeaway menu. I think what we are really looking at is festive, feasting, celebrations. Who knows, it might be seasonal, it might be marriage, it could be any other things. But what it is not is your day-to-day rubbish.
This seems then to be a ritual site where our ancestors held religious feasts. But can Phil be sure that it's contemporary with Stonehenge?
Can we prove that these ring ditches is of the same date as our Neolithic pits? If we can do that, then we actually find an incredible ritual complex of the same date as maybe Stonehenge.
The team digs a trench across the double henge, looking for evidence that will give them a date.
Phil, look at that.
What you got there then? Pot?
Yeah, that's a decoration.
Ah! That is?
Yeah.
I swear that is. That's decorated. You little devil, Johan.
It's a fragment of pottery.
Well, I'm getting really, really excited about this because it looks like it is decorated. You can see there's a bit of a ridge there and a bit of a ridge there, and these grooves. And I think that that is the best indicator that we've got of grooved ware, which is the typical late Neolithic pottery. That is what we want to find.
Grooved ware pottery like this dates from the same period as Stonehenge, so it strongly suggests that this double henge was in use at the same time. I've invited Phil to come into our lab with some of his finds to give me a fuller picture as to what our ancestors were really up to at this unique site.
They are places where people are gathering together and feasting, and they have to be ceremonial monuments.
So these very strange balls, I mean, what are those about?
These are made out of chalk. What you'll notice in some places, you look at that, you can see the actual manufacturing traces. Now, chalk is a very soft rock. If you start beating it about too much, you will wear those manufacturing traces away. So I think that they are ritual material, being made for some function, and then they are then being placed in the pit. Those spheres, those balls are special.
Now, what about the stone tools then? So these were coming out of the pits as well.
Axes. Axes were incredibly powerful objects to them. They're almost symbolic offerings to show their wealth, their status, their power, because the material that is in the pits is the refuse, if you like, from people who are carrying out the ceremonies in our henge-type monuments.
This completely unexpected discovery reveals a significant ritual site where Neolithic people gathered for ceremonies and feasting. By the time you've done all your post-excavation work on this, what are you going to add to our understanding of the Stonehenge landscape?
The people at my site would probably have witnessed the construction of Stonehenge.
They're just a few miles away.
And what we've now done is we're moving our knowledge from the west bank of the River Avon and showing that equally as important is life on the east bank. And it just blows me over. I mean, I'm just absolutely...
Britain's first double henge is a massive discovery that over the next few years could fundamentally change our understanding of how our ancestors 4,500 years ago used the Stonehenge landscape. Our next excavation also takes place on Salisbury Plain, just 5 miles away from Stonehenge. But the story it's revealing is very different and took place just 100 years ago. 2016 was the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Somme, the bloodiest battle in the history of the British Army, with 60,000 casualties on the first day alone. Those that led the campaign have been widely criticised for the way the battle was fought, for the inexperience and inadequate training of the soldiers. But does archaeology support that perception that the young men of Britain were sent to the Western Front like lambs to the slaughter? Salisbury Plain. Covering an area the size of the Isle of Wight, for over 100 years it's been the site of Britain's largest military training ground. During World War I, thousands of soldiers came here in preparation for fighting in the trenches of northern France. However, it's often thought that this training was too short and inadequate. Incredibly, a map has been uncovered in the National Archive that might change this perception once and for all. It suggests that the army was at least planning to recreate German trenches of the Western Front in these fields, so our soldiers could rehearse attacks on them. But were those trenches ever actually dug and used for training? Military archaeologist Richard Osgood has come to investigate.
To get a map of where they've sited these practice trenches is really unusual. You've got individual notifications on the map, so an S is a shelter. MG, you might have guessed, is a machine gun position. To get all that together is really a huge opportunity. But nonetheless, the map tells you about what they're meant to do. It doesn't tell you what actually does happen. Maybe this map was schematic, maybe it's not what's dug. Our job here over the next couple of weeks is really to see what's left under the ground, and the ideal would be to get architecture from trenches and evidence for the lives of the people that were here 100 years ago.
Trench warfare dominated World War I. With the invention of new powerful weapons such as massed artillery bombardments and rapid-firing machine guns, soldiers were forced to dig trenches to hide in for protection. Soldiers could live in these trenches for weeks at a time before being ordered to go over the top and charge at the enemy. If Richard can prove that extensive German trench fortifications were recreated on Salisbury Plain, it's proof that the soldiers sent here received comprehensive training in attacking German positions, dispelling the notion that they were ill-prepared. On the first day of the dig, Richard's team starts to look for evidence of one of the German frontline trenches marked on the map.
We're looking for a machine gun position. It's marked, helpfully, MG on the map. Already we're finding lots and lots of traces of the architecture of the trench, and this is just stripping the topsoil off.
Richard finds a post from which barbed wire would have been hung, cleverly designed so it could be put into the ground without making a noise.
If you're putting a barbed wire fence into no man's land, you're hitting it with a hammer, it's making a big noise, and snipers soon are attracted to that. The way they work out how to deal with that is to put these things in, and this will have a sort of a corkscrew at the bottom, and to put it into the ground you put a stick through this eyelet and then you wind it down into the ground.
And a few metres away they find the barbed wire that it would have supported.
You know, you look at the obstacle of that. Imagine having that in front of the feature you're trying to take. It's a real impediment.
Then, just behind where the barbed wire was found, they discover what they've been looking for: a section of a frontline German trench.
So we're on the German frontline trenches, and we were hoping to find the firing positions. Do you think we've got any evidence of that, Rich?
We've got some really good evidence. We've got what we have identified now as a fire step. So a fire step is what lets you stand up out of the trench. So when you need to fire, you can get up, you can fire over the top, and then when you finish, you can get down into the relative safety of that extra 1.5 foot worth of soil.
This is clear evidence that the soldiers were training to capture authentically recreated frontline German trenches. But were the fortifications marked on the map behind the front line also built? If they were, it would prove that the soldiers were training not only to attack the front line, but also to fight right through to the rear.
Okay, so we've got this really interesting shelter, and importantly we've got the corrugated iron roof that covered the shelter. We've got this little step here, which is probably some sort of seating arrangement so that with the roof above people could sit underneath.
Shelters like these would have offered some protection from the elements, as well as from the shrapnel of artillery bombardments.
Even more interesting is at the very bottom we've got all this trample, which actually shows where the troops would have been walking during the time of using these trenches.
The trample floor isn't the only evidence that these trenches weren't just for show, but were used by large numbers of soldiers.
What we're looking at, is it a latrine or not?
It is a latrine. For you, it's more of a urinal rather than a proper toilet. We know that because of the yellow sandy-like material at the bottom.
That's put very politely.
Richard is now excavating trenches even further back from the front line, and here he finds evidence of how soldiers were trained to continue the battle once the German trenches had been captured.
There's a shelf facing up the hill in each of these little slots. This is as if the British have captured the German trenches and they've worked their way through the German front line, they've got through the reserve and support lines, and then they have to dig in facing the presumed German counterattack from up the hill.
It's evidence that major battle simulations were taking place here. After 2 weeks, they've uncovered an extensive network of trenches, shelters and machine gun positions, a faithful recreation of what soldiers could expect to encounter on battlefields like the Somme.
They utilised the high ground over there, they utilised the high ground in front of me, and the hillside behind me. And this is just the German positions. This is hectares and hectares. It's a vast training landscape.
It's incredible that this map had been lost, and without it we wouldn't have had a clue that so much effort had been made in recreating such an amazingly huge trench system. Richard's discovery on the ground changes World War I history and the view that soldiers were poorly trained before being sent to war.
People that are training through this in 1915 are getting as good an experience as they possibly can. This is the example of generals really trying their very best to give the training required for what's going to happen in 1916, getting away from the idea of these chaps just walking around the parade square with broom handles and then being sent to imminent death on the Battle of the Somme.
Even practicing on Salisbury Plain, trench warfare must have been miserable. So what can archaeology tell us about the men who trained here? Richard has come into the lab to tell me. And you've got some of the artefacts here as well.
Yeah, we do. This is all about morale in many ways. You can be bored in the trenches and wet and miserable, and the one thing you want to do if you're sitting there cold and tired is have a brew. And that tin over there, that's a tin of condensed milk.
Right.
And the soldiers bayoneted it.
Yeah.
You can imagine them sitting there in the trench, need a brew, and you pour the condensed milk in, chuck the tin away. And I think that's lovely. That's all about keeping sane, frankly. The other thing you've got connected with that sort of thing is that thing. I'm really pleased this was empty and we didn't damage it in opening it, because that's a tin of sardines. You can imagine what that would have been like 100 years on if we'd opened it.
Yeah.
But again, having things like tins of fish, cups of tea, will make these practice trenches not seem quite so bad as they might otherwise. They're not under fire from the Germans here, but nonetheless, they've got the same sort of misery of existence, and that's the sort of thing that's critical to get into the training.
And what's this? This has got some writing on it.
You can see Liverpool reg on it. It's part of the King's Liverpool Regiment. You think of the famous Kitchener poster in 1914, the big recruitment one. It's these guys, recruited in 1914, but we had no idea that they were pretty certainly here, training for what became the Battle of the Somme, and they've left that carving behind.
So they've just carved that in a lump of chalk.
Bored soldier carving their regiment into this thing, and then it ends up in the bottom of the trench.
But a fantastic record they were there.
Oh, it's lovely, and we didn't know they were there. That's why archaeology is brilliant, because that links you to the people, and that's what's so crucial, that you get back to those individual stories of those guys that were here in the First War. After that training experience, they then go through into this very famous first day of the Battle of the Somme, and for them, it goes pretty well. They take relatively... Yeah,
because there are thousands and thousands
famous
of
figure of
casualties.
60,000 casualties on the first day. But for the Liverpool pals, they fight alongside the French on the right-hand side of the British attack, and they take all their objectives and they take relatively few casualties. And that's not the story you get when you think of the Battle of the Somme.
Despite the extensive training that Richard has shown these soldiers received, training wasn't enough. Just a few weeks after their success on the first day of the Somme, the 4,000 eager young volunteers of the Liverpool Pals had received over 1,000 casualties. A shocking 1 in 4. This is one of Bristol Museum's greatest treasures, the Thornbury Hoard. It consists of 11,460 coins, and it was buried in the 4th century AD, just as the Roman army was withdrawing from Britain. But actually, this pales into insignificance beside a recently discovered hoard, one of the largest ever found, this time dating to the 1st century BC, when Britain was on the cusp of being assimilated into the Roman Empire. The island of Jersey. In 2012, 2 metal detectorists found a massive hoard of 2,000-year-old coins in a potato field. Jersey heritage painstakingly excavated. It was the world's biggest discovery of Iron Age coins ever. The archaeologists wanted to find out what treasures lay inside and what it tells us about the British Isles at a time when the Romans were advancing towards our shores. The hoard was taken to the local museum where conservator Neil Mara and his team began the painstaking task of clearing off the mud. There were an extraordinary 70,000 coins. And more treasure lay hidden within. Unusual coloured beads.
Rather lovely.
And gold and silver bracelets.
This has been much more complicated than expected. We're lifting one piece at a time out, but everything is interlinked and fitted around each other. Haha, success. It's a piece of silver wire, probably from jewellery, just cut up and essentially just scrap metal now.
Who would have cut up this precious metal, and why was it all hidden? As they dig deeper into the hoard looking for clues, they uncover its greatest treasure.
It's heavy. It's heavy.
An amazing collection of thick golden torques, ornate neck rings. Only the most important people in Iron Age society would have worn neck rings of this thickness and weight. After 2,000 years in the ground, it's taken Neil 4 years carefully picking it apart to reveal its contents.
We've now removed 50,000 coins, so we're, we think, 5/7 of the way in. About 20,000 coins left, and you can see there are still a few things outstanding.
With so much of the hoard now revealed, Neil has made some startling revelations.
Well, it's the biggest coin hoard of its kind in the world. We know which tribe actually made it because the coins that have already come off and we've cleaned are of a type we've seen before from the Cornwall tribe, with a head on one side and a very, very abstract horse on the other.
The Cornwall were an Iron Age tribe of Celts that inhabited part of what is now Brittany in France. So why did they bury this vast treasure on Jersey? Neil has come into the lab with some of this amazing treasure to tell me. Neil, let's be clear about this. This is an absolutely enormous hoard, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's got the stage now where in this hoard we've got more coins of this period than have been found in France at all.
In the whole of France?
Yeah, and as we've gone through, we found more and more apart from the coins. Talks were the big surprise for us. I mean, this is one of 8 complete ones that we have.
Can I pick that up?
Yeah, please do.
So this is a gold Iron Age neck ring.
Yeah.
How do you get it onto your neck?
They come in 2 halves, so you'd literally give it like a twist like that and then pull apart.
And the pattern is peculiar because it's not facing the observer,
No,
it's kind of facing the wearer.
It would be inside by your throat, yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What about the coins themselves? Do they give us a clue as to the date?
I mean, literally 99.5% of the coins in this hoard dates are around sort of 62 BC or before.
They're
dated.
Lovely. Look at that. So
They're beautiful faces,
wonderful
aren't
little
they?
face on that side.
We know that those were all made in the run-up to the invasion by Julius Caesar, and so perhaps they knew that Julius Caesar was coming up from the south, defeating, you know, tribe after tribe after tribe, and that they hid their wealth. They actually got it offshore, rowed the thing to Jersey. That we seem to be somewhere that was quite hard to reach, quite hard to land, and so perhaps it was somewhere to hide. And dug it, buried it, with the idea, presumably, of coming back for it later, and were perhaps killed.
The burial of the Jersey hoard reveals the fear that gripped the Celtic tribes as the Romans advanced towards our shores. But conversely, the Thornbury hoard at Bristol Museum dates from a time when, 300 years later, the Romans were in retreat, showing us that the collapse of empire could be equally tumultuous. The Thornbury hoard that's on display upstairs is just a small portion of the 11,460 Roman coins that were discovered. And so I've come down here to the stores to look more closely at some of those coins and find out more about the hoard. How was it discovered?
It was discovered by a man who was digging a fish pond in his back garden. So he found the remains of a pot with over 11,500 coins inside. All of a similar type, all of a similar period.
These coins act as a history of the Roman Empire.
Virtually all the coins are Constantinian, so Constantine, the emperor that's associated with enabling Christianity to be worshipped across the empire.
And found in Constantinople.
And found in Constantinople. So you get two types of coins. So you get one coin in this hoard which hark back to the foundation of Rome.
Ah, that's beautiful. So we've got a little wolf with Romulus and Remus underneath. That's a gorgeous coin. Look at that.
And then there's a female personification of the new empire's capital, which is Constantinople, and that is Constantinopolis.
The coins are also evidence of the empire's decline.
By this time, the coinage has become very debased. There's very little silver content, and virtually everything is made out of copper alloy, and also not quite as well modelled.
So the coins are being literally debased. They are getting smaller. Is this a sign of a crumbling economy then as Rome goes into decline?
Yes, they're debasing everything.
So where were these minted then? Are they British coins in origin?
None of the ones that I've seen are actually from Britain. We know that because they have little marks on the bottoms of them. We've done a sort of, it's almost like an airline map of where these things have come from, and the furthest one that we've found is Antioch in Turkey, and we've got things from Thessalonica, but also Croatia.
As part of the empire, Roman Britain was connected with diverse people and cultures across Europe and beyond, and this was also a period of relative peace. But when the empire crumbled, it must have been a difficult and even frightening experience for many people. And why on earth was this volume of coins buried?
That's the $64,000 question, because we have no idea.
This was a troubled time, wasn't it? So, I mean, I suppose there are numerous different reasons that somebody could be burying money in the ground.
They could.
They could be trying to hide it. It could be effectively banking it.
And you kept it and you hid it from anybody. You didn't want to have it. And that might be somebody you thought was coming to raid. And clearly we have no idea why nobody collected it.
By the 4th century AD, the Romans were pulling out of Britain, and whoever buried these coins never came back for them. Britain was plunged into a period of uncertainty for the next 600 years, sometimes known as the Dark Ages. Our next excavation provides brand new and very strange clues as to how our ancestors made sense of this upheaval. For archaeologists, burial sites can offer precious clues as to how our ancestors lived and died, but sometimes they also provide us with surprising insights into what seem to us today to be bizarre beliefs and strange rituals long since forgotten. Deep in the Wye Valley in Hereford, a team of archaeologists is on their way to investigate an intriguing discovery near a remote cave.
Day one, the site is up a very, very steep slope, which is densely wooded. On 3 sides of the site, there are 60-foot high vertical cliffs. And immediately above the site, there is the opening of a small cave.
Known locally as Merlin's Cave, in the 1920s an incredible find of prehistoric tools, pottery and bones was made, revealing this to be a sacred burial site for our Neolithic ancestors over 4,500 years ago. But in 2011 a new discovery was made, purely by chance, just below the entrance.
I was doing caving with one of my sons, and we decided to try and get into this cave, which is about 15 foot up the cliff face. So I left my son sat on what was a tree throw. While I was scaling the cliff here, he discovered a flint scraper, a really lovely flint scraper, and some pieces of pottery and some teeth.
Clyde took the finds to the county archaeologist.
The pottery was prehistoric, the teeth were human, and the flint was early Neolithic.
The county archaeologist Tim Hoard was so intrigued by the finds that he organised a dig to see if he could find whether there was a connection between these new finds and the ones in the cave. What he found was even more exciting.
We found 2 human skeletons laid out under 2 of the tree throws. We carbon dated them to about 600 AD.
This was shocking. Tim had expected to find Neolithic skeletons, but these were Dark Age skeletons from the 7th century AD, and they were lying outside a prehistoric burial site. But with such a huge time difference, surely there couldn't be a connection. Then the next piece of evidence emerged.
One of the burials had bones deposited with it, dated to the Bronze Age from the cave, so 12, 13, 1400 years older than the burial.
The prehistoric human bones seem to have been deliberately placed in the later graves. Whoever buried these men clearly knew about the earlier burials inside the cave.
So what we wanted to know was who these people were and why they were involved with the burial in the cave. We know that they were doing something very strange, very different.
Are these 2 men the only ones buried here, or are they part of something much bigger? This year, another dig was organised to find out.
It's a very unusual place to find people being buried. We're on a very steep hillside. The soil isn't very deep. It's actually quite hard to make a grave that's deep enough to bury a body. Now, the reason we've come back here to do further investigations is to try and determine the extent of this burial activity. Do we only have 2 burials, or is it actually a small cemetery?
A trench is dug a short distance from where the 2 burials were found. After 2 days of digging, they start to get results.
Just found a human bone which is projecting out of the side of the section of the trench. It's a fragment of a large human femur, and we're further to the south of where the previous 2 burials are, and it's giving us an idea that the extent of this burial area is considerably larger than we'd seen previously.
More human remains are uncovered.
We've just found this, which is a human tooth. It's actually a human canine, an adult tooth.
And then a little bit of bone, which is just from the path.
Now we're finding remains of other skeletons, including the thigh bone of a newborn child. Now, up to now, all of the bones found from these burials have been of adults, but now we're finding evidence that even very young infants are being buried at this site.
Analysis shows that these date from the same period as the skeletons first found beneath the cave entrance. It's evidence that the team has uncovered the burial ground of a Dark Age community. It's an incredibly strange discovery. Prehistoric burials inside the cave seem to have been so important to this community 2,000 years later that they chose to be buried close to the cave, even though digging graves on this steep ground must have been incredibly difficult. And another discovery is made, evidence that these people are also being buried, along with bones from inside the cave.
Now, on the top of this bone here, we can see encrustation, and this is in fact tufa or stalagmite, which is only formed inside the caves. This bone has come out of a cave, so this provides a direct link between the cave up there and what's being deposited down here.
The team from Manchester University have discovered not only a forgotten burial ground, but a strange funerary ritual that's been lost for 1400 years. I'm interested to find out what the archaeologists think was going on here. So you've got Dark Age burials outside the cave, and then inside the cave there seems to have been a lot of bone, human and animal bone, from much, much earlier, some period in prehistory.
From at least the Neolithic. It's buried with 2 cow bones.
So this bit here?
Yep.
So a bit of cow rib.
And then there's the knuckle of a cow leg bone by his head that he was buried with as well.
Tim believes there could be a special connection between this particular man and the earlier burials inside the cave. And have you analysed the bones? What are you able to say about this individual?
He is certainly well into his 50s, if not in his early 60s when he died. He was a very tall person, or at least he was well over 6 feet.
We can see that with him lying out here, can't we? I mean, look at those thigh bones.
Yeah, the fact that he is large and robust and lived to a reasonable age would suggest that, if nothing else, he was well fed, which may suggest that he was being looked after.
So who do you think he was?
I think, just with the fact that he's buried with animal bones that must have come from the cave, that he was actually in charge of looking after the contents of the cave for a period of time.
So you're seeing this as a sort of cult centre, then?
I think a cult is probably the way to look at it. They're honouring their ancestors, and they're honouring a cave that, as far as they're concerned, has been there for millennia. But at the same time, both burials seem to be laid out in, broadly speaking, a Christian tradition, extended with arms folded over the pelvis.
So in that sense, they're following the Christian tradition, but there is this little bit of prehistoric bone as perhaps an indication that, OK, we're going to do this Christian style, but we'll include something from the past to show that we haven't forgotten about that tradition.
The Dark Ages were a tumultuous period in British history. Anglo-Saxon tribes were invading, and it was a time of great political and religious change, with the establishment of new kingdoms and pagan ideas vying with Christianity for supremacy.
It's highly likely that these weren't Anglo-Saxons. These were actually the native Welsh Britons, if you like, and they're adapting to Christianity as it comes from the south and east and moving up into the west, and they're gradually adapting.
Such a strange sight, and I think it really reminds us we don't expect everybody across England and Wales to be doing exactly the same thing at the same time. The community at Merlin's Cave reached back into their past, combining burial practice with what seems to be an ancestor cult, and perhaps that provided them with much-needed reassurance during such an uncertain period in our history. After the Romans left, Dark Age Britain is often thought of as less civilised and more backward, a time when we lost cultural and trading connections, not only with Rome, but with the world at large. But now a striking new discovery in Tintagel, Cornwall, is challenging this view. Tintagel is best known for its connections with the legendary King Arthur, who, according to myth, was conceived there. Well, this year, archaeologists returned to Tintagel, hoping to investigate its rich Dark Age history and disentangle archaeological fact from Arthurian fiction. The castle remains that you can see on Tintagel today date from the medieval period, but archaeological remains from around 600 AD, found on previous excavations, suggest that there was once a large Dark Age settlement here. In 2016, archaeologists returned to Tintagel to explore areas of the island that had never been dug before. They wanted to find out what kind of settlement it was, but what they found took them all by surprise.
Day one of the Dig Diary, and today we've started excavating on the eastern terrace just here and over behind the castle on the southern terrace. We've opened up 4 trenches, and that's where we're hoping to find what we used to call Dark Age buildings, or buildings that belong to the 5th and 6th century.
The archaeologists from English Heritage and Cornwall Archaeological Unit have barely begun to strip off the turf when they make their first discovery.
We've got this possible floor layer of paving.
Evidence for the construction of terraces.
What it looks like is that we have 3 distinct flat terraces with slopes between at the moment, which we hope when we take some material away we'll find some nice walls.
Disappointingly, further digging reveals no traces of buildings.
Maybe there are some terraces which are being used for small enclosures, maybe as cultivation plots rather than for buildings.
But who were these cultivation plots for? On the south side of the island, they make an extraordinary discovery.
We have 3 terraces, this being the substantial wall at the southern end and leading to another wall, presumably for a building, and that leads nicely to a set of steps, and they lead neatly through part of the top building. So we think this is the building, nice level floor and steps up to it.
This is their first big breakthrough. Massive 1 metre thick rock walls are revealed. Never before has such a solid Dark Age building been discovered in Britain.
Substantial build to top and top end.
But what is this building? In their search for clues, they find a rubbish pit next to it.
We've got an animal jawbone here, so you can see the teeth. Something like a wild boar, perhaps.
The remains of boar and other animals may be evidence of a Dark Age feast.
I can see.
And further surprising finds suggest this was a high-status building.
So shallow bowl, nice rim. Put a bit of fruit in or something.
Oh, it's beautiful. It looks like Fassian, which is from Turkey. So that is a beautiful thing.
And Carl Thorpe, the small finds expert, is particularly excited by the discovery of an incredibly rare piece of glass.
Thought you like it.
Oh, that is stunningly beautiful.
Yeah.
That is definitely post-Roman glass. It's even a rim, which is fantastic. And judging from the curvature, I think it is of a little cone cup between the 5th and sort of 7th centuries AD, sort of Merovingian glass, originating in France.
Somewhere, yeah. For what? For
most likely drinking wine, and that is just, it's always stunningly beautiful.
The team was simply not expecting to find this many high-quality foreign goods. The people living here were clearly not only very wealthy, but trading over vast distances.
Got a small sherd of what looks to be amphora. That's from the Aegean area, Eastern Mediterranean.
Wow.
So,
fantastic.
Yeah.
By day 12, the team has unearthed the foundations of a building 11 metres long and 4 metres wide. They're convinced that the people who lived here must have had immense wealth and power.
I don't think that anything like this has been found before. So there was some surprised faces, and lo and behold, it's gone on and on. So this might be the style for the whole precinct of buildings on the southern side. Substantial walls will hold up substantial roofs. So, yeah, it's all good. Very exciting.
Further excavations throughout the rest of the summer revealed that this was just part of a large complex covering much of Tintagel. This has astounded the team. They didn't expect to find evidence of such a wealthy and sophisticated community from early Dark Age Britain. So do they really think they've discovered a Dark Age palace? And if so, what was it like to live in it?
We can't be certain that it's a royal site, but whatever it was a high-status site because we got so much exotic material.
Yeah, so, I mean, we saw some of this material coming out. So tell me about this piece of pottery.
Yes, well, this is very, very finely made. It's probably part of a...
thin there.
Yes, it's probably... It's a fine table dish A complete vessel would be quite large, so you've got this sort of large, expansive, quite shallow bowl, probably for communal feastings. And this is the handle of an amphora sherd, which would have contained wine coming from the Aegean, from Turkey, Marseille, around the coast of Spain, you know,
and this is not actually from Tintagel, is it?
This is a reconstruction of what one of these amphorae from the Aegean, from Greece, might have looked like. But this would be for carrying wine, probably, but could also be for olive oil. We don't know, but...
And the archaeology that you're looking at here, of course, dates to a really interesting time. We're looking at Britain after the collapse of the Roman Empire. We're looking at independent states.
Yeah, I mean, Britain does break into lots of little states, like Mercia and Wessex and Kent and places, and Cornwall carries on in its own way. And this may well be a royal centre with connections far afield.
See, I'm starting to go on flights of fancy now, and to me, this is the royal apartments of the palace at Tintagel. Yeah. This is where King Arthur lived.
Well, it has got that extraordinary association from when Geoffrey of Monmouth writes about the history of the kings of Britain in the 12th century. He says that Arthur was conceived at Tintagel. Yeah. What, did he invent this? Had he pulled it out of various other legends? We really don't know.
Although they may not have found evidence of King Arthur himself, the team have discovered that Dark Age Tintagel was a prosperous centre of trade and perhaps even a seat of royalty, a bastion against the turmoil that was engulfing Britain at this time. In the past, infant mortality rates were much, much higher than they are today. In the Dark Ages, it's thought that perhaps half of all children didn't make it to adulthood. And yet, when you look at cemeteries from the period, there just don't seem to be enough juvenile and infant burials. So were the burial rites for children different to those for adults? It's certainly possible. And archaeologists in South Wales have been making some intriguing discoveries. In the winter of 2014, record storms battered South Wales. They were so ferocious that they eroded the Pembrokeshire coastline. And human bones started to appear as the sand dunes were stripped back, revealing an ancient cemetery. These skeletons may contain precious clues about our past. So for the last 3 years, a team from Dyfed Archaeology has been trying to save what they can from this now dangerously exposed site.
This is classic rescue archaeology. Absolutely, you can see here that the threat is obvious and happening, and we're just dealing with it.
It's day 3 of this year's dig, and they are beginning to excavate the Dark Age layers from the 7th to the 9th centuries AD. One burial emerges that is incredibly unusual and entirely different to anything they've seen so far.
So it seems to be a woman buried with a baby in the crook of her arms.
That's right.
That's incredible. Yeah. That's the baby's head, yeah.
Skull there. Pelvis in this area.
Okay.
Here's the mother's left arm.
Finding an infant burial from this time is extremely rare. Tiny bones tend to decompose quickly in many cemeteries. But here, the infant bones are perfectly preserved by the coastal sand.
Ken, do you want to tell me what you're drawing?
It's a kiss grave containing the remains of what looks like an infant.
An infant's kiss grave.
Either newborn, probably, or
yeah.
even a perinatal, very small child you see from the length of it.
Yeah.
And incredibly, other infant burials soon begin to emerge.
It's rare to find this quantity of infants in a communal cemetery. It doesn't matter what date it's from, they are rare to find. Here we've got a large number of them because the preservation in the sand has been so good for skeletal remains.
By week 3, they've found an incredible 20 infant graves, a sobering reminder of infant mortality rates at this time, and an intimate insight into how parents felt about losing so many young children at such an early age 1400 years ago.
So what we've got here is a really rather nice bone pin, possibly a shroud pin. And some of the burials that we've had here, you can see from the position of the skeleton, the feet particularly, that these people look like they were wrapped in shrouds when they were buried. There was one absolutely tiny little infant. I actually excavated it myself. Its legs were actually crossed at the ankles, so again it suggests it was wrapped before being placed in the ground.
This pin would have been used to carefully secure the shroud around this dead child before it was placed in its grave. And out of the sand comes an intriguing series of finds.
This is one of a number of areas where we've had white quartz pebbles across the site, but they've been the graves of infants, so the pebbles have been really carefully placed. We had one with over 100 pebbles on the top of it, densely packed, and obviously a lot of care invested in the grave of the baby inside.
So what did these quartz pebbles signify? DIG co-director Marion Shiner and osteologist Katie Hemmer have come into the lab to tell me about their discoveries and what they tell us about the attitude of Dark Age parents to the deaths of their children.
We don't know the purpose of the quartz pebbles. They're found in mortuary contexts from the prehistoric period onward, and they're found at other early medieval Welsh cemeteries. There's a passage in the Bible in Revelation which talks about the person who has found Christ being given a white stone and in that a new name. There is evidence that in the later medieval period, each mourner at a funeral brought a stone or took a stone and put it on top of the grave, but you know, there must have been over 130 people at the funeral of that child, if that's what this is signifying, and they are only on the children's graves.
And they're burying very, very tiny children, well, infants.
Yes, it's the thing that really strikes you about the site is the level of care that a lot of these infants and young children were buried with.
Absolutely, I think we have to move away from old notions that people didn't care for their children at this time. They are investing the same amount of effort, if not more, into the burials of the really youngest members of this population.
Discoveries like this show how archaeology can change the story of Britain. From revealing lost religious practices of the Dark Ages and turning on its head our view about how prepared our soldiers were when sent to fight on the Western Front, to the unique discovery on Salisbury Plain that shows the ritual landscape of Stonehenge was bigger than we'd ever imagined. Our ancestors made the country we live in today. And through archaeology, we've been able to reach back through the centuries and touch their lives. We might be a small island, but we've got a big history that's still full of mysteries. So every year, hundreds of archaeologists go out hunting for clues to our forgotten past.
Oh, that is stunningly beautiful.
Yeah. In 2016, their discoveries have been more exciting than ever.
It's all happening now.
You little devil, Johan!
In this programme, Digging for Britain showcases the very best of them from the north. Each excavation was filmed as it happened by the archaeologists themselves. Their dig diaries mean that we can be there for every exciting moment of discovery.
Cracking little finds.
Superb.
And now the archaeologists are bringing their finds from pottery to metalwork to human remains into our lab so that we can get a closer look at them and find out what they tell us about our British ancestors. Welcome to Digging for Britain. In this programme, I'm joining archaeologists in the north of Britain on their quests to discover the lost worlds of our ancestors. In the Outer Hebrides, we dive deep to discover startling Stone Age technology.
Oh my word! I have never seen anything like that.
We join the team tracking down the famous monastery of Lindisfarne, sacked by the Vikings and lost for over 1,000 years.
It's an incredibly exciting thing to be doing. It's hard not to be like a little boy when you finally get the trenches open.
And we are there when an excavation takes a surprising turn to reveal the grisly reality of life in a medieval village.
It must have been a catastrophic event that happened that ended their lives.
I've come to the National Museum of Scotland to see how these discoveries are helping to rewrite the history of Britain. I've been given behind-the-scenes access, so I'll be looking at parts of the collections that are rarely seen by the public. And I'll be getting up close and personal with some of Britain's most remarkable and enigmatic treasures. Our first dig comes from Burnswalk in Dumfriesshire, where some new discoveries are rewriting the history of the Roman conquest. When the Romans invaded Britain, they swiftly conquered most of the southern tribes, but they never conquered all of Scotland. Twice they tried, and twice they failed. But no one's ever found any trace of a major battle. Well, this season, archaeologists think they've got definitive evidence for the first time of a Roman siege in Britain. When the Roman army invaded Britain in 43 AD, Burnswalk Hill was home to a local Iron Age tribe who built a hill fort on its summit. But this hill fort is unique in Britain, because just metres from the summit, it is flanked by two huge Roman army camps, one to the north and one to the south. For decades, it has been believed that these were Roman army training camps. But now archaeologists think that they might be siege camps. If they're right, it would show the Roman war machine in Britain was far better resourced than we'd ever imagined. Andrew Nicholson is the dig director.
We have 2 weeks to excavate here at Burnswalk. We're putting 2 trenches here into the Roman South Camp and 1 trench into the Roman North Camp, and we're looking for evidence of Roman missiles such as lead sling bullets and Roman stone ballista balls.
First, the team start to dig in the South Roman camp. And on day 1, dig coordinator John Reed is there with the camera as they make their first exciting discovery.
Okay, here we are in the South Camp and the guys have just shouted me over. So, what have we got? And oh yes, that looks very suspicious. Yeah, perfect.
The first thing we uncover under the turves is a Roman ballista ball, a local red sandstone ball that would have been launched from a catapult from the Roman camp up towards the hill fort.
We know from evidence across Europe that Roman siege tactics were brutal. This lethal stone missile would have been shot from a catapult or ballista to maim or kill an enemy. It was one of the many powerful siege weapons in their arsenal. After a promising start, for the next 3 days the team dig for more clues. And one small but highly significant find keeps turning up.
Over the last few days, we have managed to secure over 40 Roman sling bullets. These are the very objects that we came here to try and find. Over 40 is quite a significant amount.
These solid lead sling bullets were ammunition for a simple but deadly weapon.
These are propelled from a hand-slung catapult at between 35 and 45 metres per second.
They were fired by specially trained troops called slingers, who could disable the enemy with a fast and furious hail of lead bullets. It's even more evidence that the hill fort was attacked. But if this was a full-scale siege, the team would expect to find more evidence of ammunition in the North Camp. But nothing has turned up. Then, on day 4, a metal detector picks up a strong signal. This could be the breakthrough they need.
Okay, here we are round in the North Camp now. Hi guys.
Hiya John.
How's it going?
Well,
have we found any bullets?
You wanted sling bullets, and we have 1 or 2 for you here.
Oh, fantastic.
In the last count there was, I think, just over 20.
This is very, very impressive.
But when they dig down further, they find more evidence than they could ever have imagined.
It goes off the scale that there is still a large number of them continuing downwards beyond these stones. At the moment, we've got 169, give or take a few, visible on the surface. It's certainly the largest in situ collection of Roman sling bullets that have ever been found anywhere within the Roman Empire.
The team now has clear and compelling evidence for a highly organised and brutal Roman siege.
The sheer quantity of missile material that they brought to the site is certainly a clue that there was an assault on the fort, and that they are simply using overwhelming force.
We know that from 73 AD, the Romans tried to conquer northern Britain. But until now, we had no idea that they used full-scale siege warfare against the native tribes. I want to know more about how that siege on Burnswalk Hill Fort played out. What was the outcome? So, John, this is just a small portion of that great cache of lemon-shaped slingshots that you found. So they would sit in a sling like this, then?
That's exactly right. And then you would turn it around your head, and then this flips out and it has the same ballistic momentum as a .44 Magnum bullet.
That's astonishing.
Yeah, this is the forgotten firepower of the ancient world.
Yeah. But what are these curious things? They look like pendants almost.
Yeah, they're very exciting because they've never been described before. And the key element of them is they all have a little hole in them.
And it doesn't go all the way through?
It doesn't go all the way through. And I had the theory that they were for poison. And my brother, who knows nothing about archaeology, said, I fish. And when I cast my fishing weights with a hole in it that size, they whistle as they go out. So we made some, we tested them, and they whistle. This is what they sound like. So what they are, we think, is a terror weapon. They make a sound.
Until this dig, we had no idea that the Romans designed bullets like these.
When you imagine, that's just the sound of one.
Yeah.
If you've got 300-400 slingers all going at the one time, that is a lot of noise.
So psychological warfare as well?
Mm-hmm.
These bullets could travel at over 100 miles per hour. To simulate their effect on human flesh, John set up a test using ballistic gel. This is what the Britons at Burnswalk were up against. So you've got what looks like this large cache of ammunition in the camp. Have you found anything on the hill fort itself?
Well, if you look at this, the pink dots represent the spread of bullets across the site. So we can see the position that the shooters are standing in, and we can also see where the recipient target area is along the south face.
This ballistic map clearly shows that the people on Burnswalk Hill were totally surrounded by the Roman army.
So we now have the smoking gun of what took place here.
And what about the little cluster to the north of the hill fort?
This is a group of bullets that we didn't expect. This is the only area that you can escape from the north. And almost certainly a group of people met their end in that position there.
I mean, that's horrendous, because that's not just about driving people out of that hill fort.
No.
That's about a massacre.
That's about a massacre,
Yeah. The evidence from Burns Walk Hill entirely changes our understanding of the Roman invasion. We had no idea that they'd brought this level of strategic planning and firepower to Britain. So for our ancestors, the consequences of resistance could be devastating. Our next dig takes us to the heart of another British community who also faced adversity over 1,000 years later. The Middle Ages in Britain were a time of unprecedented chaos and turmoil. Lives were blighted by war, famine, and plague. But away from the cities, we know less about how these events affected the lives of ordinary people. Our next site offers us a precious glimpse into the struggles of one rural community during these turbulent times. Thornton Abbey in North Lincolnshire was one of the richest abbeys in medieval Britain. Founded by Augustinian monks in 1139 and dissolved by Henry VIII 400 years later. Archaeologists from the University of Sheffield have been digging here for 5 seasons, building up a detailed picture of how the monks of this wealthy abbey lived. But last year, they began to excavate just outside the abbey walls. It was here that the team made a shocking discovery that would turn the course of the dig from focusing on the lives of the rich to the much more elusive medieval poor.
We were originally looking for a rectangular building, but what we actually found was a rectangular pit that was full of around 40 individuals, all placed in the pit at the same time.
The bodies of 21 adults and 27 children, piled into a mass grave.
It consisted of one fill, suggesting that the bodies were placed there, and then the one thing was backfilled in one event. We assumed because they'd been buried in one event that it must have been a catastrophic event that happened that ended their lives around the same time.
This part of Lincolnshire has always been rural, so whatever killed this many people must have devastated the local community. To find out what it might have been, I've asked site osteologist Diana Swales to join me in the lab. So Diana, this is a huge number of people all buried in one mass grave. When does it date from?
The radiocarbon dates come back from the 14th century.
And do you have any idea as to the cause of death?
When we excavated them, we had no idea. So our first point of call was to check there was no trauma at the time of death. So we got a good look through and checked that nobody had been massacred. There's no evidence for those kind of activities. So we took DNA samples from the teeth and we sent them off for analysis. And they identified the bacteria Yersinia pestis, which is the bacteria for the Black Death.
The Black Death swept across Europe in the mid-14th century, killing a staggering 50 million people. In Britain, it's estimated that a third of the population died. Incredibly, this is the first plague pit that's ever been found in the British countryside. But what surprised the team most was its location, right outside an abbey. These were ordinary women, men and children, not wealthy monks. So why were they buried here? Then, just metres from the plague victims, they make another unique discovery.
We discovered a long, thin building running on an east-west alignment. And having excavated this, we can now say with some certainty that this was actually a medieval hospital.
So this explains the location of that plague pit. And it's the first time a medieval hospital attached to an abbey has ever been excavated. It could give the team valuable new insights into medieval healthcare.
So we think this hospital was in use from the mid-12th century until the dissolution. That would have consisted of a hospital chapel, which is the area behind me, and the area to the west, which was the dormitory where the inmates would have visited and lived and died.
Experts aren't sure what relationship existed between the wealthy abbeys and the local population. So now Pete wants to find out, who were the people using this hospital? Just a few days later, the team strike it lucky.
So just outside the walls of Hospital Church, on all three sides, we're finding a large number of individuals.
They've found the official burial ground of the hospital patients. This is an extraordinary opportunity to look at the range of diseases that medieval people suffered from.
The lower limb of this old adult male has been amputated just below the knee a long time before they died. This young child is really, really interesting because they have a bulbous, very round head, which looks as though they have hydrocephaly. The water on the brain is causing the skull to expand. This skeleton here has bowing of the femur, and this looks suspiciously like rickets. This is a malnourished individual.
Over the next week, the team uncovers more victims of malnutrition and disease. We're face to face with the suffering of our ancestors, medieval Britain's rural poor. In the last few days of the dig, the team discovers another burial, this time inside the hospital chapel. But this is not a poor man's grave.
And we've just come down onto this, which is a later medieval graves marker or grave slab. And actually we have the word obit and Ricardus. So it suggests that whoever was buried underneath this originally was named Richard. Gently.
The archaeologists flip it over to try to find more clues about who Richard was.
So we've actually got a date for when this individual died, which is the 2nd of April, and that's in 1317. And obviously we have the individual himself, Richard, and he's in fact holding across his breast a chalice, which would have been his kind of symbol of office. So he's definitely either a canon or a priest.
Underneath the elaborate grave marker, the team finds the human remains of Richard himself. The clues suggest that he was a key figure in this hospital. Back in our lab, I'm hoping that Diana can reveal what his role was.
This is Richard,
This is Richard.
So we have his actual human remains, and we have this image of him as he was in life.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that he was bald on top. He's got hair on the side. It's almost like a tonsure. And so how old was he when he died?
Well, looking at his teeth, they're very worn, which makes me think that he's actually very old.
Gosh, that third molar there, there's hardly any enamel left on it.
Yes.
It's really just the roots, isn't it? So do we presume that he was a priest who was working in that hospital then?
Yes, so he's buried in quite a prestigious location within the chapel. And at this time, there are no doctors at hospitals. It's up to the priests to have a kind of caregiving capacity.
And what about the population that we see buried outside the hospital and the hospital chapel? Because you seem to be seeing quite a lot of children buried there and also a lot of pathology as well.
What it's showing is that we are getting normal lay populations being buried at the hospital. It's most exciting things about Thornton Abbey is that we're seeing an interaction between the normal lay populations and the monastic community.
For looking after them?
Yes, looking after them.
At Thornton Abbey, the archaeologists were surprised to find themselves unearthing the lives of the poor as well as the rich. And then they were amazed to discover such a tangible link between the two that is changing our understanding of medieval healthcare. Archaeology gives us information about ordinary people in a way that the history books simply can't. But when we go back into prehistory, before any written records, archaeology is the only way to understand how people lived. Our next dig takes us back into the Stone Age, where a recent chance find has led to a completely groundbreaking new discovery.
This pottery is 5,500 years old. It's Neolithic, but it wasn't discovered during an excavation. Each one of these pieces of pottery was found by divers at the bottom of a loch. And this led the archaeologists to investigate further. What they discovered was truly astonishing.
The pottery was discovered on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, in the shallow waters around one of the beautiful islands dotted across Lewis's many lochs. This season, a team of underwater archaeologists set out to solve the mystery of why the pottery was there. What they found is turning our understanding of the Scottish Stone Age upside down.
It's day one in the Outer Hebrides on the Isle of Lewis. I'm Duncan Garrow, and this is my friend and colleague, Fraser Sturt. Hello, Fraser.
Hello, Duncan.
We're standing by a loch, as you can see, and we've come to investigate 3 islands within 3 different lochs, the first of which is this one.
The team starts their investigation around an island in Loch Arnish.
So the kinds of thing we'll be looking for is, of course, the pots on the bottom of the lochs, but also maybe some other archaeological evidence that gives us richer insights into the kind of lives people were living at that time.
The water here isn't just freezing cold, it's murky. And at first the divers struggle to see anything. But after a few very cold hours, one of the team does manage to spot something.
I happened to notice amongst the sort of bad visibility a little shape, and it was just this rim that sort of caught my eye, which it didn't look like any of the stones. This is actually 2 pieces prehistoric ceramic.
Pots like this were used for everyday cooking. Could this suggest that 5,000 years ago, a family made this little island their home? It's a tantalising thought because, as far as we knew, Stone Age people didn't live in the middle of lochs. At Loch Langabat to the west of Loch Arnish, the team go looking for more evidence of island life. They're prepared for another long, cold day of underwater hunting. But within just a few hours,
Oh, Dan! Oh my word! I'm just going to come and take some video. I have never seen anything like that. That is absolutely amazing.
this beautifully decorated pottery has been underwater for 5,000 years, last touched by its Stone Age owner. And the loch bed is brimming with pottery like this. The archaeologists were right. It looks like these islands were family homes. They hope to find more evidence at Loch Borgastale. It's a full day of diving before they find anything. But when they do, it's incredible.
We've been out snorkeling and looking at the islet out there, and we found some beautiful Neolithic pottery and timbers in situ.
These timbers are crucial. They suggest that Stone Age people weren't just camping on these islands, they were building permanent structures on and around them. And when the dive team look even closer, the full realisation hits them. This whole island has been built by hand.
It's definitely man-made. We can see that it's now stones piled up on a natural rise. Then we've also got split timbers which show that it's been made by people. It's just been amazing. So this is really significant. It's new Neolithic archaeology, so we couldn't be happier.
These lock islands were built by people 5 millennia ago. Duncan and Fraser are now joining me to explain how this discovery changes the story of Britain. So, Duncan and Fraser, this looks like a Neolithic settlement site on an artificial island.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've got, actually. You're right. And they often use the term crannog to describe those, which is basically an island, sometimes artificial, with a building or buildings on it. So,
But crannogs are Iron Age things.
yeah, that's what people have always said all along.
It's amazing, because that pushes them back, well, at least a couple of millennia.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we've got a picture of what people think they may have looked like.
Crannogs are famously found in prehistoric Scotland, Ireland and Wales, but until now we believed that they only appeared around 800 BC at the beginning of the Iron Age. This new evidence shows that people were building these sophisticated island homes 2,000 years earlier. Because they're not using natural islands, they're bringing those stones out into the middle of the lake and dropping them there until they've got an island.
There was a calculation done that someone thought it was 1,500 tonnes of rock that you might need to move. So this isn't just we should build a little island. This is well, you can say a monumental effort. So
what's next? You have to go and look at all the known crannogs, which are presumed to be much later. But do they have earlier origins?
It is quite possible, to be honest. Lots of them might be Neolithic.
It's an overused phrase, but actually the archaeological textbooks are going to have to be rewritten.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
This discovery has pushed the invention of Britain's famous crannogs right back into the Stone Age. We knew that people were building houses back then, but we certainly didn't know that they were building whole islands. You can imagine that this would have been a communal effort, and it seems that the Neolithic communities of the Outer Hebrides were well connected, and not only at a local level. Deep in the vaults of the National Museum of Scotland, I've come to see some finds which reveal much wider connections with other parts of the British Isles. That is such an incredibly well-preserved axe. Where was that found?
It was found in Shilishadder, in the north of the island of Lewis, and we radiocarbon dated it. It came out between 3,300 and 3,000 BC.
Fantastic.
But the other thing that's really incredible about it is that the axe head itself is not local at all. It's from County Antrim in the northeast of Ireland.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's travelled all that way?
Absolutely. It's one of several pieces of evidence that tells us that the farming communities in the Hebrides were connected with farming communities elsewhere.
And what about these balls? I mean, they're absolutely wonderful pieces of art, aren't they?
They are superb, and these are very slightly later. But again, they tell us about long-distance contacts. So these three are from the Hebrides, these two are from Orkney, and then these are from elsewhere in Scotland.
What are they?
Well, many hypotheses, but certainly you could have used these as weapons. You could have dealt somebody a pretty good blow on the head if you were to swing it and throw it at them. But I think more importantly, these were weapons of social exclusion. So members of the elite were making long-distance boat journeys as a way of showing off their power. Most people would be just humble farmers, and not everybody would have a boat. But the people who were able to travel long distances, for them, this was a very important prop to their power.
The connection between all of these just demonstrates really vividly the connectedness of the world in the Neolithic.
Absolutely, and the sea plays a very major role in all of this movement of ideas and objects and people. I think we tend to think of the sea as a barrier, but no, in the Neolithic, it was like a superhighway.
Now the discovery of the crannogs of Lewis is starting to allow us to piece together how some of Britain's highly connected Stone Age communities actually lived. In an island nation like ours, people living on the coast have often been at the forefront of innovation and change. Our next dig comes from Lindisfarne Island, off the shores of Northumberland. 1400 years ago, this was the spiritual heartland of Britain.
The Anglo-Saxon monastery at Lindisfarne was a beacon of Christianity in Western Europe and an incredibly important cultural centre.
For almost 200 years, Lindisfarne was a driving force in the creation of a new Christian Britain. The monks of Lindisfarne converted the pagan Anglo-Saxon kings to Christianity. And through their contact with the Pictish, Gaelic and Celtic tribes of Britain, they produced some of the finest works of art and scripture in the medieval world, like the Lindisfarne Gospels. This Renaissance is known as the Golden Age. But in 793 AD, this world was annihilated when the Vikings landed on these shores and wiped the monastery from the map.
Remarkably, no one knows the precise location of the early monastery. This year, archaeologists went looking for it.
Their mission is to find this lost centre of early Christianity.
It's an incredibly exciting thing to be doing. It's a site with such potential. It's hard not to be like a little boy when you finally get the trenches open.
It's a ridiculously exciting place for an archaeologist to dig. It's one of the touch points in the entire Christian tradition.
If they can find the original monastery, then they may also find evidence of the monks who were the masterminds of its golden age. Today, only the ruins of a much later 12th century priory remain.
We're standing in a field to the east of a later medieval priory. We did geophysics here, and we've put our 2 trenches out on areas where we thought we could see possible structures.
For 3 days, the archaeologists scour the trenches for any hint of a building.
A big monastery like this would have had lots of different buildings, churches, workshops, craft areas. And what we're trying to do is try and find some of these structures.
On day 4, it looks like they've made a breakthrough.
In this trench, we were looking for a building, and we do seem to have a broad band of rubble, and it's possible that this might be the foundations for a wooden structure. We certainly know that other monasteries of this date in the north of England often have buildings with similar kind of stone rubble foundations.
These could be some of the first stones laid down by the Anglo-Saxon monks when they built the original monastery 1,400 years ago. But then one of the team spots something mixed in with the rubble.
So we've got a possible cranium.
Well, we're down here. We've come down onto the top of what looks like the top of the cranium, so the top of the skull, and there's other scatters of bone across this whole trench. It does suggest that at some point there must have been a reasonable-sized burial ground in the area.
The team start to wonder if they found the monastic cemetery. On day 9, they find something hidden in the rubble that could hold a crucial clue to the world of Lindisfarne.
We found a piece of stone which looks like it's possibly got some carving or an inscription on. It's John just giving it a bit of a clean. We're going to see what materialises.
Letters begin to emerge from the mud.
Yes, it's Anglo-Saxon name stone.
Oh wow.
7th, 8th century AD. So that's a cracking little find.
That is superb.
That is good.
That's tremendous.
This is a so-called name stone. It's probably would have acted as a small headstone at the top of a grave. But when you find something like this, which has actually got the name of one of those Anglo-Saxon monks, it's exactly what you hoped you'd find. So he may even have been involved with the creation of the Lindisfarne Gospel. I think a stone like this is pretty much a smoking gun. You must be in a very near vicinity of an Anglo-Saxon monastic cemetery, so it's exactly what we've been after.
Then, with just a few days to go, the team find another key piece of evidence.
You can't just come up here and say these things to me. Where is it?
One of the volunteers over there in Trench 1 has found a small coin. It's almost certainly an Anglo-Saxon silver coin. So again, it's exactly the kind of thing we're looking for.
This coin was minted at the height of Lindisfarne's golden age.
We've had the name stone, now we've got a coin, one piece of evidence, two pieces of evidence. So I think it's safe to say we've found some really solid evidence of the early monastery here, and it's a really exciting day for our team.
These new finds are of the right date. They do seem to be tantalising traces of that lost Anglo-Saxon monastery. They're a link to the monks who were there at the pinnacle of its golden age.
Oh, what extraordinary finds from this first season of digging at Lindisfarne. So, I mean, this is fantastic. This is the headstone you found.
This is the prize find. This is the really distinctive piece of Anglo-Saxon sculpture. You can just about see there's an inscription on here.
Yeah.
It's an Anglo-Saxon name, so it's someone called Ithfrith.
Yeah, I can see the fifth here.
Just see the frith.
Yeah.
And originally this would have been the top of a cross with the terminals here and here.
Oh, yeah. This is fantastic. I mean, we're getting a view of Lindisfarne going right back to, you know, the time when the first monastery was there and those beautiful Gospels were being made.
Yeah, I mean, these things, the person who's remembered on that stone may well have seen the Gospels being made, may well have been involved in creating the Gospels. So we are right at the peak of the golden age of Northumbria with these finds.
And then that golden age disappears. We have a whole sequence of Viking attacks on Lindisfarne and apparently an evacuation of the island. But you're starting to query that as well?
We are. We put another trench in another field and we found this fantastic 10th century comb. But this suggests that perhaps there was a presence, a continued presence in defiance of those Viking threats.
Do you think there's any chance at all that you might find evidence of that Viking attack?
What I think is really interesting is the way that these stones have been broken up, and this cemetery is clearly being quite badly mashed around. And is it to do with the Vikings? We don't know, but hopefully we'll be able to find out.
In this first short season, the team unearthed far more than they expected. Next year, they hope to dig deeper to discover more about Lindisfarne's golden age and perhaps the famous Viking attack that destroyed it. Lindisfarne transformed Britain with works of insular art, a unique style which reflected a fusion of different artistic traditions. More than this, insular art can reveal the spiritual beliefs of one individual. One of the finest examples is here in the National Museum of Scotland.
Alice, this is a stunningly beautiful brooch. When does this date from?
So this is the Hunterston brooch. It's made some point between the mid-7th, mid-8th centuries AD. It's the biggest, most elaborate brooch that we have from early medieval Scotland, but it's also the flowering, if you like, of an immense mixing of influences in northern Britain at this time.
So it's blending together several different styles then, is it?
Yes, because this form of brooch is found in Scotland and in Ireland, but here it's melded together with Anglo-Saxon interlace and animals.
Now, this cross-like decoration there, do you think that might be a bit of Christianity coming through?
I think it's absolutely some Christian influence. Early Christian art in Scotland and Ireland at this time, it does embed layers of meaning. And although this brooch would be meant to be seen by other people like this, there's quite a different reading of it possible to the person that's wearing it looking down. What we're looking for here is this little filigree beast. Now, this amber inset is its eye.
Right.
We've got two circular insets here, which are the top and the bottom of its open jaw with these hooked teeth biting the cross.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. Before you told me that was there, I couldn't see
a creature at all, but now I can see him and I can't stop seeing him.
And these two beasts are confronting either side of this cross. This design derived from a really important early Christian text, and that references the knowing of Christ. So Christ will be known in between two living things.
And as you say, this is facing the wearer. It almost suggests that it's more important that the person wearing it knows about all of this symbolism and that it's a talisman.
Absolutely, yep. We tend to see these brooches as status symbols, as secular objects related to kingship, perhaps, or power. But in actual fact, they can be deeply Christian as well.
The Hunterston brooch gives us a powerful insight into one person's faith over 1,000 years ago. But when we go even further back in history, before Christianity, it becomes more difficult to decipher what people believed in. The beliefs of our prehistoric ancestors are mysterious. They didn't write anything down, so we're left turning to archaeology for some clues. This season, archaeologists digging on Orkney have found new evidence of very strange rituals involving sacred objects, including human remains. They have been digging on the island of South Ronaldsay to solve the mystery of Scotland's most iconic Iron Age monuments, known as brocks. The remains of 500 brocks can still be seen along the Scottish coastline. Once these were remarkable dry stone towers up to 13 metres high, and we believe that they were homes to elite tribal families, defensive forts, and statements of power. But we don't know why most of them were abandoned by the 4th century AD.
Carefully.
Here in Orkney, Martin Carruthers and his team have been investigating one example known as Cairns Brock. They've discovered clues that after abandonment, this brock served another purpose. This season, they kept us a dig diary.
So day one, Cairns, straight into the thick of the action.
From previous digs, the team knows that the walls of this brock were deliberately dismantled in the 2nd century, and the stone was piled up inside to create a mound. So now, in their 10th year of excavating, they're ready to remove the rubble from inside the brock.
Managed to remove a huge amount of rubble from the northern side of the rock, and now for the first time in possibly 2,000 years, we're getting to look at this northern section of wall, which is particularly beautiful and stunning.
This outer wall was an impressive 5 metres thick. It formed an impenetrable fortress, 22 metres in diameter. The team thinks that the answer to why it was dismantled might lie inside. For 10 days, they scour the brock floor for anything that might help them to explain it. Then, there's a breakthrough.
So it's day 17 at the Cairns, and we're on the outer wall of the brock, and Carolina has made quite a startling discovery. What have you got there?
A human jaw.
Wow. There's no doubt it's a human jaw, no doubt whatsoever from the shape of it.
Just next to it is something even stranger.
It looks as if that human jaw is closely associated with a very substantial vertebral bone of whale. It's quite a remarkable deposit so far.
The next day, there's more intriguing animal bone.
Lo and behold, they've revealed all this amazing set of red deer antlers that seem to be almost wrapped around the outside of this whalebone.
These strange finds could be a clue as to what was going on here when the brock was dismantled.
It looks like what happened here is that towards the end of the life of the broch, they laid out these items as a kind of a decommissioning deposit, an act of closure at the end of the broch.
I've asked Martin to join me in the lab to explain what purpose these dismantled fortresses might have had and how these objects might have been used as part of an ancient ritual. Well, Martin, what a fantastic season at Ken's Broch. And these really are astonishing finds. This whalebone here, this is fascinating.
It is
and
indeed.
Someone has hollowed it out to convert that into a vessel. And then next to it are these antlers, which you can see really nicely here.
They've been propped against the outer side of the whalebone vessel.
And this is the mandible then that was there with this whalebone vessel and the two antlers.
Yep.
And you've just got the remains of the holes for the roots of the incisors here. So you're looking at an old person here.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating because one of the hypotheses we have is that perhaps this is a fragment of someone that's been curated and held onto for a longish period of time, maybe even centuries, akin to the kind of saintly relics that are kept for a long time in the medieval period. The fact that this is an elderly person is interesting because they presumably had a biography and they were a well-known, maybe even renowned individual.
This jawbone could have belonged to one of the Iron Age elite of Ken's Broch, whose remains were used in this strange ritual. But are you seeing this as specifically, I don't know, part of funerary ritual here then?
I don't think the presence of this individual is actually recognising their death. This is the use of a dead person in ritual paraphernalia. And at the right moment in time, at the end of the broch, that's when this piece of this individual is then put back into the ground as part of that deposit. So effectively, they're turning what had been a freestanding, upstanding, massive, substantial house for generations, and they're turning it into a mound, literally an ancestral pile.
Martin is at last beginning to unravel the mystery of why at least one of Scotland's famous brochs was dismantled. And his strange finds from this season suggest that the broch remained at the heart of the community, becoming transformed into a sacred site. The excavation at Ken's Broch is still turning up amazing finds after a decade of digging. But sometimes it's one extraordinary find that triggers a huge new excavation. The Anglo-Saxons were Germanic warriors who in the 5th century AD invaded Britain, bringing us our language and our laws and setting up the first kingdoms in what would become England. But there are few historical records from this time, and archaeological evidence is also thin on the ground. But this year, a serendipitous discovery revealed a forgotten part of the Anglo-Saxon story. In 2011, in the small village of Little Carlton in Lincolnshire, local builder Graham Vickers was metal detecting in a barley field when he discovered some extraordinary objects.
And most of the things I found have been found in this area over here. And this is pins, brooches, styli like that one. I found over 20 of these.
Graham had stumbled across something incredibly rare. Prestigious objects and writing tools belonging to the literate Anglo-Saxon elite. So why were they turning up here in this empty field? These finds were so rare, a team of archaeologists from the University of Sheffield launched an investigation. They were intrigued because there had never been any evidence for the Anglo-Saxons in this part of Lincolnshire. Very quickly, dig director Hugh Wilmot and his team uncover a big settlement, a goldmine of new information about how these mysterious Anglo-Saxons lived.
This is the Little Colton Dig Diary for our excavations in 2016. We've just finished machining off the plough zone, and the archaeological features are already popping through.
Now Hugh wants to find out what kind of settlement this was. After just a few days of digging, the team get their first clue.
Well, we've been finding lots of really exciting things. This is a pair of tweezers that's been metal detected, and this is a pair of tweezers that was found yesterday. I mean, they could be for cosmetic purposes, but it has been suggested that possibly these might have served other functions, such as for turning parchment pages in a book.
In Anglo-Saxon England, Christian monks were usually the only people who could read and write. So for Hugh, this is a big clue that this could be a forgotten monastery. But on day 8, the team finds something that tells them that this was more than just a place of prayer.
Really, it's rather hard to see, but it's a bit of a glass vessel. It's definitely Saxon. And it's just a globular beaker, and that's really rather nice find, actually, Sam. Yeah, that's good. This is the kind of artefact that you wouldn't expect to find on an ordinary site. This is a high-status drinking vessel. It's probably continental import. Very nice.
This shows that the people who lived here were wealthy and trading with the continent. But another find reveals something even more surprising.
One of the most unique artefacts we've got is this iron manacle. It has a barrel lock here and a hinged loop here, and this would have gone around the leg of some captive or possibly a slave. Slavery was, widespread practice in early medieval Europe, and this again suggests high status trade in individuals, perhaps. But again, this is a pretty much unique find. I don't think there's been another one found on a British site.
This is a remarkable find. So far, the evidence suggests that this site could have been a monastery, an upper-class settlement, and a trading centre. Then, the dig takes an even more unexpected turn.
My pleasure. So now, 2 weeks into the excavation, we're actually coming face to face with the Anglo-Saxons themselves. This part of the site where we're digging is actually the location of one of the Anglo-Saxon cemeteries.
All these people seem to be buried in a Christian style, laid out on their backs and aligned east to west. But on day 18, the team uncovers an individual that's unlike all the others and shows some signs of strange burial rites.
It's our penultimate day here at Little Colton, and we're just finishing up the excavation. And one of the things we've been doing is excavating this skeleton here. And it's probably the most exciting thing that we've found so far. Now, what makes this a really interesting burial is the fact that they've been buried on their front. But there's something else that really makes this special. And it's when you see how narrow the body is in the grave. These are the two shoulders, and there's about 25 centimetres between them, so they're really crunched together.
It's a bizarre burial for a Christian person. But what more can it tell us about this Anglo-Saxon settlement?
So Hugh, these are the bones that we saw being uncovered right at the end of that video. So looking at this skeleton in the grave then, this is somebody buried face down and very narrow.
Yes, absolutely. This one's clearly been bound in a shroud or something like that. Very, very tight.
And then there's something odd going on with these
Well, I hope you can tell me about this, because...
Because here we're looking at the back surface of a femur, and then you come down to here, and there's a kneecap. Now, you haven't got kneecaps on the back of your knee.
No.
So this suggests that these legs have come apart at the knee and then have been put back together, but twisted 180 degrees.
Wow.
So I think what we can say for definite is that it was buried in the ground after the body had started to decompose, that the limbs have started to fall away from the rest of the body. But then, great care actually has been taken to try to put the limbs back.
Absolutely. Well, a great deal of care has been taken over this burial. So this could be an individual who perhaps has died away from the site and has been brought back to be interred here specifically.
Because there are stories about the bodies of kings, for instance, being moved.
And, of course, saints and holy people. So, there could be something like that going on here.
This special burial, then, suggests Little Colton may have been a settlement of great importance. and it was perhaps the resting place of an Anglo-Saxon king or saint.
So what you found then is a lost Anglo-Saxon settlement?
Absolutely.
And possibly monastery?
No one knew it was there before, and it certainly looks a good contender for a possible early monastery.
You're really redrawing the map, archaeologically. Nobody knew this was there.
Little Carlton is so packed with information that Hugh and his team expect to be digging here for many years. At the moment, the finds are intriguing but hard to decipher. But the more that they uncover, the more they will be able to untangle the story of how the Anglo-Saxons staged their occupation and laid the foundations for the first kingdoms of England. This year's finds in the north have changed the story of Britain. From what it was really like to face the might of Rome, to the forgotten Stone Age inventors of Scotland's famous crannogs.
Oh, Dan! That is absolutely amazing.
And the lost rituals of our ancient ancestors.
There's no doubt it's a human jaw, no doubt whatsoever.
Through archaeology, we've been able to reach out across the centuries and touch our ancestors' lives. We may be a small island, but we have a big history that's still full of mysteries. So every year, hundreds of archaeologists go out hunting for clues to our forgotten past.
I have never seen anything like that.
In 2016, their discoveries have been more exciting than ever.
It's all happening now.
You little devil, Johan!
In this programme, Digging for Britain showcases the very best of them from the East.
Each excavation was filmed as it happened by the archaeologists themselves. Their dig diaries mean that we can be there for every exciting moment of discovery.
Cracking little find.
Superb.
And now the archaeologists are bringing their finds from pottery to metalwork to human remains into our lab so that we can get a closer look at them and find out what they tell us about our British ancestors. Welcome to Digging for Britain.
In this programme, I'm joining archaeologists in the east of the country to share in their biggest discoveries. In Barnet, North London, we're searching for the site of one of the most important battles of the Wars of the Roses.
We found something that's actually quite interesting and could indeed be from the battle.
We travel to Norfolk to reveal strange burial rituals of the earliest Christians.
We've uncovered our best preserved wooden burial.
1, 2, 3.
And we're in East London as archaeologists unearth the theatre that inspired some of Shakespeare's greatest plays.
It's quite thrilling to think that he was here performing on the stage that was just behind me.
To find out how these discoveries fit into the story of Britain,
I've come to Canterbury to explore the city's museums and find out how the artefacts in these collections help to tell the story of the East.
Our first dig takes us to East Anglia, where an entire 3,000-year-old village has been preserved in the famous watery fens.
Must Farm is a Bronze Age site in Cambridgeshire, and what can I say? I honestly believe that this is the most exciting archaeological discovery in Britain during my lifetime.
I was lucky enough to visit the site earlier this year when the excavations got underway.
Oh, wow.
preservation is so extraordinary, it's been dubbed Britain's Pompeii.
Oh, this has just sent a shiver down my spine. This is amazing.
The Must Farm site consists of 5 complete roundhouses, the remains of what was once a thriving Bronze Age village. But 3,000 years ago, it caught fire and collapsed into the marshy fens where the houses and their contents were perfectly preserved in the mud.
We can see quite clearly the layout of the settlement from up here. And you can see how the roof timbers, the radiating roof timbers, have fallen down almost in situ.
So far, the excavations have revealed Britain's oldest wheel.
It's just bigger and better than anything else, and complete. The fact it's complete is wonderful.
And precious imported glass beads.
Beautiful objects, aren't they?
Showing us that Bronze Age Britons were technologically advanced and more closely connected to Europe than we'd previously imagined. We've come back to Must Farm because the team expects more revelations to emerge from inside the roundhouses.
We often talk about archaeological sites as being time capsules where we can peer in and see the objects of the past and imagine what life was like. But Must Farm is a special case. Its catastrophic end means that we have this moment frozen in time. The layout of the roundhouses is there to see, and we've even got the contents of those houses as well. So we're starting to be able to really appreciate what family life was like 3,000 years ago.
Before the discovery of Must Farm, we knew that Bronze Age roundhouses consisted of a single living space, but how this space was used was a mystery. The houses and contents are so well preserved here that for the first time, Mark Knight and his team are effectively able to step inside Bronze Age homes, where they hope to see exactly how our ancestors organised their everyday lives.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? It's beyond any sort of dream of what you could do within archaeology, and the sense that there is height. You know, you feel like we'll have to sort of dip ahead slightly and we'll be walking into those buildings.
The archaeologists begin with Roundhouse 1 in the centre of the village. They start digging at the northeastern end of the building, and one of their first finds is extraordinary: the remains of 3,000-year-old prehistoric food.
You can see the sort of carbonised remains within the pot. Sometimes you can see grains, fragments of leaves and things like that.
As they continue to dig, a surprising pattern emerges. Everything they find here is for food preparation.
This is the northeastern quarter of Roundhouse 1. So we've got a bowl here. There's a wooden platter starting to come up here. There's a big storage vessel just there. There's more bowls just over here, and then there's a wooden bucket or bowl and an inverted platter just there as well.
What the team has found is quite clearly a dedicated kitchen area within the roundhouse. Until this discovery, there has never been any evidence that Bronze Age people laid out their homes like this. And this kitchen is equipped with everything needed for a slap-up meal.
You can imagine that there was a handle here and a handle there, but presumably for presenting a meal or, I don't know, a pig's head or whatever it is that sits on this object.
As the team move on to focus on another part of the roundhouse, the discoveries take an entirely different turn.
Okay, so we're just excavating the south-east quadrant of the roundhouse. And we're coming down to an area, we've got lots of textile, and we've got a really nice piece down here.
This is the weaver's quarter or something like that, because we've got loom weights, we've got textiles, and we've got plant fibres that haven't been processed or spun yet.
This is a revelation. This roundhouse is not an all-purpose space, but it's subdivided into highly organised open-plan living.
We've taken the roof off Roundhouse 1, and we're doing that in quadrants, and we're finding that each of the quadrants that we excavate is different from the next. So that sense of the arrangement of things going on inside the roundhouse is really, really important, I think.
We knew that this type of Bronze Age home consisted of a single room, but we didn't know anything about the organisation. This new evidence shows us that the space was divided into specific areas. And suddenly we're looking at something very familiar to us. It feels like the way we organise our houses today. And in the final part of Roundhouse 1, there's another surprising revelation.
It's the 31st of March, first thing in the morning. We found these little pieces of metalwork. So we've got a small axe type thing that might be like a chisel or something like that, and then another kind of currently unidentified piece of metal that's like a tube. We don't really know what that could be yet.
This is the axe object, and then this is the tube.
Bronze Age metal tools like these were thought to be rare and precious possessions, so this number of discoveries is unexpected. And astoundingly, the finds keep coming.
And then Lou has just found... oh, I hadn't seen that one. Lou's just found this little pen.
Yeah, pretty cool.
And then there's also this spear. So that's quite exciting for us because that's a spear inside one of the houses. I think that's quite unusual.
On site, Mark is developing a theory that could explain what's going on here.
We're starting to see, I think, toolkits, but they seem to be occurring within roundhouses. So it does look like that each household had I don't know, punches and awls and chisels and gouges and axes and things like that, and tweezers and razors and things like that occurring within the household.
The extraordinary finds here take us closer than ever before into the lives of our Bronze Age ancestors. I've invited Mark to join me in the lab to help explain how Must Farm is revolutionising our understanding of the Bronze Age and what it was like to live in one of those 3,000-year-old roundhouses.
Mark, what would it have been like walking into this house?
So if we entered this building, I think the first thing that we would find is that the floors were quite springy. So we've got a watercourse beneath us, and we're not necessarily certain about our footing, I think. And then we have that sense of distribution, I suppose. The entranceways are facing towards the sunrise, towards the east. So we're coming in where there's the most light, and that's immediately we see the metalwork distribution and all of the pots and the wooden vessels and things, and then the textiles. And so things that maybe that needed light, things that you were doing on a sort of daily basis and stuff like that. Whereas the western half of the building, it was pretty much materially sterile. It was very rare to actually find anything in there at all. So maybe that is the sort of dark recesses, the sleeping area, the places like that and things.
But it's the contents of these houses that are really changing our ideas about Bronze Age living standards.
Where did all of this metalwork come from?
So this is all from Roundhouse 1.
From a single house?
From a single house. So it's already sort of bamboozling the experts in a sense of its quantity. So we're seeing for the first time what a complete assemblage or household assemblage looks like. And this is it. And it's surprising us.
And it's not just Roundhouse 1. Incredibly, each house in this village was equally well equipped.
It feels as if we have a set inventory for each structure, and that each structure has a list of objects that are very similar. So it's, 11 pots, 7 axes, a couple of spears, 2 sickles, 2 gouges, a razor, and then amongst that we've got wooden buckets, wooden platters.
It's utterly fascinating. It's rather like if I was to come around to your house, I would expect to find certain sets of things. I'd expect in your kitchen to find a drawer that contains cutlery in it, that contains knives and forks and spoons, and I would expect that probably you'll have a garden spade and a garden fork, and probably just one garden spade and one garden fork. It's this kind of level of detail that we're getting at.
Absolutely, and I think that's the sense of, You feel like we're adding some sort of texture and flesh, I suppose, to that period that we'd not previously had.
Importantly, Mark doesn't think that the settlement at Must Farm was extraordinary.
I'd like to think that this is typical. This is a representative settlement of the later Bronze Age. This is not an anomaly. We're not looking at some sort of special place and things. We're actually seeing something that has been beyond us because we just don't get these levels of preservation.
This is where archaeology gets really exciting for me, where it's forcing us to confront our expectations.
Yeah.
And it's going to make us change our minds.
I think so. I feel like, do you know what I feel like? For the first time, I feel like we're digging their world and not our world. And I think that's the difference.
The excavations at Must Farm are rewriting our understanding of life in the Bronze Age. It seems that 3,000 years ago, our ancestors enjoyed a lifestyle that we'd recognise today, complete with lovingly designed homes and much prized personal possessions. This muddy and waterlogged site is revealing the beginnings of our modern world. Must Farm was discovered by accident in Cambridgeshire's marshy fens, but some discoveries are the result of intense searching. One such search took place on the outskirts of London in Barnet, the site of one of the most decisive battles of the Wars of the Roses. In the 15th century, the houses of York and Lancaster clashed over control of the English throne. It was a war that would end with the death of Richard III and the establishment of the Tudor dynasty. One of its most decisive battles was that of the Battle of Barnet, but rather extraordinarily, nobody knows exactly where it happened. The Battle of Barnet took place on the 14th of April, 1471, and pitted the Yorkist forces of Edward IV against the Earl of Warwick's Lancastrian army. The battle is believed to have been fought where the modern town is today, but no evidence of the fighting has ever been discovered here. But when medieval cannonballs were found in a field a mile to the north of the town, archaeologist Sam Wilson decided to investigate. And when he got to the area, he was intrigued to see that it fits the historical descriptions of the battlefield.
We are in this area that's really of quite a lot of interest to us, because if you look around, you can see, if I pan the camera around, very slowly, all the way around, you can see we're sort of in a very large bowl in the landscape. Land rises up away from us over there, rises up over there, and then it rises up all the way over there. And potentially this puts us in an area that is actually described in one of the accounts, and it talks about Edward moving his men off the road into a hollow in a marsh, and this whole area could potentially, we think, be that hollow that's described in the accounts.
It's a promising start in his search for the battlefield, but the scale of the challenge is daunting. They will need to scour nearly 2,000 acres, and what's more, these fields are all littered with modern metal debris.
Is there anything exciting?
Probably a ring off an umbrella or something.
It's a piece of rubbish.
Piece of rubbish.
Hooray!
The team knows that the Battle of Barnet was a brutal and bloody affair, ultimately decided by hand-to-hand combat. So metal detecting gives them the best chance of finding items lost during the fighting.
So we're here in Barnet again. It's about day 60, something like that. I've slightly lost track. And we're in this very, very large field. It's about 50 acres in total.
Finally, after months of combing every inch of this ground, they find their first possible sign of the medieval battle.
Oh, it's all happening now. This is half of a purse bar. What you had was little block in the centre with a loop that attached to your belt, and then a corresponding one of these on the other side, and then you had a cloth pouch that hung off of it. So for your loose change and your spectacles or whatever, and that would just sit on your belt. So potentially that's something, well, probably every man in the 15th century would have had a purse of some sort.
It's a promising find, but they need much more evidence. They're in luck.
Well, that's really good. I mean, that's about the 4th spur we've had. I'll let you do the explanation, Simon.
Yeah, it's a mount for leather. It's got like little hooks on the back for piercing the leather, then folding over.
And you think medieval?
Yeah, I've shown it to a couple of the lads and they said definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, that looks interesting.
And then the team hit the most telling find of all, a discovery that exactly matches those found at other Wars of the Roses battle sites.
Typically, as everyone was packing up, just one detectorist was still working. About the last 30 metres of his translate, we found something that's actually quite interesting and could indeed be from the battle. It's in here. Here we go. So this is medieval. It's a mount. It's quite substantial, so it's possibly a bit too big to be a belt mount. It might be off a horse harness, something like that. Perhaps this is actually from the battle, or certainly we're getting close to the battlefield.
You'd expect to find items like this on a battlefield, and they are all from the right period in the 15th century. So could this be the site where Edward IV defeated the Earl of Warwick, eventually paving the way for a Tudor dynasty?
I love that. Can I pick it up?
Yeah, sure.
So you think this would have been attached to someone's clothing or perhaps part of a horse trapping?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably a bit substantial to be attached to clothing or a belt. It's quite big, it's fairly heavy, and you might well have had several of these in a sort of repeated design. So perhaps it could be something from a horse harness, a bridle, something like that. But of course, the armies used a lot of horses, thousands and thousands of horses, to get to the battlefields.
So they're using guns from a distance. I presume that this is brutal stuff.
The cannonballs really work by pure brute force. They're solid spheres of lead. Some of the larger ones have got iron cores in them or stone cores. And really, they were just there to punch through files of men.
I find it really odd that Edward is bringing his men into this low-lying area. That seems like such an odd strategy if you're just about to engage in battle.
I think that probably is due to the fact that Edward approaches the battlefield as it's getting dark. He doesn't quite know where Warwick is, and vice versa.
But it plays to his advantage.
According to some of the accounts, Warwick actually is firing his artillery where he believes Edward to be. The accounts describe that the shots go over the heads of Edward's men, and perhaps that's because they're down in this hollow.
Do you think you've got enough evidence to actually reposition the whole battle?
I think, based on this concentration of evidence and the apparent lack of evidence elsewhere, I think we're certainly getting close to it.
You'll have to come back next year and tell us how you do.
I hope so, and I hope I can have more cannibals with me.
Incredibly, the precise location of the Battle of Barnet has been lost for over 500 years. But Sam's investigation is bringing us closer to discovering not only where it was fought, but how the landscape proved to be a decisive factor in this bloody clash that led to the foundation of the Tudor dynasty. Britain has been Christian for well over 1,000 years. It's woven into the fabric of our society. Its emergence in the late 6th century, a period for which we have few written records, means we know very little about how ordinary Britons adopted and practiced this new religion. But now, 2 remarkable excavations are changing that. The first comes from Great Ryborough in Norfolk.
The spread of Christianity across England involved not just a change in beliefs, but a change in practices.
And that's where archaeology comes into its own. The chance discovery of a small cemetery in North Norfolk offers us astonishing insights into rituals practiced by a community just a few generations after conversion to Christianity. In late 2015, landowner Gary Boyce started to dig a conservation reservoir on his land. But not long after the diggers started work, one of the workmen found something unexpected. A human bone. Within days, multiple fragments of skeletons began to emerge from the mud.
Shocked would be the first words that spring to mind. Now, it's quite exciting.
Gary had no idea what he'd stumbled upon, so he called Historic England, who in turn brought in experts from Museum of London Archaeology.
No.
But as the skeletons were properly excavated, it became clear that this was no ordinary burial site.
This is the first time we've seen tree trunks that have been hollowed out to contain the body.
It appeared that every person here had been laid to rest in a hollowed-out tree trunk. This is a very unusual burial practice. But who were these people, and why were they buried in this strange way? Site director Jim Fairclough believes the orientation of the graves provides a strong clue.
Basically, by the positioning and the orientation, we think there may be some Christian influences. But again, without any sort of grave goods or anything like that, it's kind of hard to tell right now.
Like most Christian graveyards, the people buried here are facing east. Dating the cemetery may provide a further clue, but at this point, there are no objects here which could point to a particular time period. Then, one of the team gets lucky.
Well, it basically looks to be a section of pot base, just basically a shard of Ipswich ware, so mid-Saxon.
This is an important find, as a mid-Saxon date, roughly around the 8th century, suggests that these people probably were Christians, and amongst the first Britons to convert to Christianity. But using hollowed-out tree trunks for coffins is extremely unusual for this period. More clues start to emerge from the excavation.
Well, we're halfway through week 5 now, and basically we've uncovered what is our best preserved wooden burial. Again, we have a basically dug-out base from a section of tree. But on this one, we also have a lid, which is basically covered up. It wasn't a sealed coffin, but basically another hollowed-out piece of wood has been placed over the top to protect the burial. And what we're going to try and do today is lift the lid. 1, 2, 3.
Because the coffins are so well preserved, the archaeologists start to notice that the wood is very poor quality.
It's very knotted wood, so very regular shaped and very knotted in place. You see here where we have quite a large number of knots on the actual wood itself, this end piece. So basically what our specialist thinks is basically it's this wood that's unsuitable for creating timbers out of.
These people are clearly not using the best wood for their coffins.
With the wood technology they're using, which is basically what specialist says is similar to the stuff used for building troughs and mill runs, and also the lack of basic grave goods we've got so far points to like a poor Christian burial site.
Log coffins are well known from earlier periods going back into prehistory, but the archaeologists are really surprised to see this type of practice in what seems to be an early Christian cemetery. I've asked the team to come in and explain what's going on here. So this is certainly unusual to have these log burials. And does that hark back to an earlier pagan past, do you think?
I think it does. We have to be very careful when we're talking about pagan, because it's a pre-Christian religion or religions. We don't exactly know how they articulated their faith and their religion, but we do know from burials of that date that they were using structures, wooden structures of some sort, where the body was very clearly laid out in the ground. So we do seem to have, 100 years later, the same sort of tradition surviving, but with a new religion.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, you know, rather than seeing this new religion coming through with a package of ritual around it, it's very mosaic, and you've got local diversity. So it seems that our ancestors were blending pagan with Christian traditions.
Mid-8th century, there are lots of cemeteries that still have grave goods and orientations of graves in all sorts of directions, and things like ring ditches that suggest that there might have been barrow mounds over them. So it was a time of great religious diversity.
We need to look in more depth at the find spot and see if we can build up a bigger picture from it. But it's exciting times.
Yeah, and it's thrown up all of these surprises, totally by chance.
Totally by chance. We just haven't seen a cemetery like this before anywhere in England.
This is such a surprising and unexpected discovery, which seems to hark back to very ancient traditions. There may not be an unbroken link back to pagan burial rites, but what we're seeing here, thanks to the preservation of the wood, is a precious glimpse of a forgotten ritual. Chance finds like this log coffin, in fact that whole cemetery full of log coffins, give us a really important insight into how Christianity was actually practiced in those generations just after the re-emergence of this religion in Britain. But in a largely illiterate world, how did people first come into contact with Christianity? An excavation in North Oxfordshire tells a very surprising story of how the religion spread. In mid-2016, excavations in advance of quarry work unexpectedly revealed a large burial ground. Over 120 graves were discovered, many dating to the 7th century, a time when Christianity was first taking root in Anglo-Saxon England. Knowing that a site like this might produce some incredible finds, Oxford Archaeology's Steve Lawrence kept us this dig diary.
This site is a complete surprise in terms of the Saxon archaeology. We'll be here until it's done. We estimate about 2 to 3 more weeks to finish off the graves we have left.
Very quickly, the team realised that this was no ordinary burial ground. The discovery of rich grave goods with some of the skeletons indicates that the local Anglo-Saxon aristocracy was buried here, many of whom may have been Christian. Then, towards the end of the dig, they uncover one grave that is particularly intriguing. The first thing they notice are small pieces of iron mysteriously dotted around the skeleton.
This is one of the most exciting graves we've had so far. At the western end, we have 2 iron headboard stays just showing up. We have the skull, you can see at the very bottom, but that's overlain by this layer of rubble.
The team have unearthed something incredibly rare, an Anglo-Saxon bed burial.
Underneath our backs here, we do have some small iron fittings, some delicate iron fittings that go with the bed. Once we reveal or remove all of this limestone rubble, we should then see also further iron fittings.
Bed burials are unique to the 7th century, a time when Christianity was first spreading across Anglo-Saxon England. And strangely, the only people buried in this way were women. This one seems to fit the pattern.
At the moment it's looking more female than male, but that's only judging by its brow. There's not too much wear on the other teeth, so it probably is still quite young as well. Quite young.
The team removed the rubble from the grave to examine the remains of the bed in more detail.
We've now got revealed a series of 3 cleats going down each side. These are to hold the planking of the bed together. The 2 stays at the top, and a series of eyelets dotted all around with a couple of extra iron fittings at the foot end there and another one at the head end here.
These corroded pieces of iron once held together an expensive, ornate bed. There is no doubt that this was not an ordinary young woman. With the burial fully excavated, the team can see how she was laid to rest.
Start now.
We now have the bed burial fully revealed. From the skeleton we can now tell it's definitely a young adult female. She's been kind of buried in almost a sleeping-like position on her side.
To find out why this wealthy Anglo-Saxon woman was buried in this way, and to see what she can tell us about Christianity at the time, I've asked some of the team to join me in the lab.
So these are the remains of this young woman that was buried with a bed at your site, Steve?
Yep. These are fresh out of the ground. They only came out of the ground a couple of days ago, so...
Were there any other associated artefacts with her to give us more of a clue to her identity?
Unfortunately not. It was just the body and the bed. I say just the bed. I mean, the bed is an amazing discovery.
Yeah. And Sam, you've dug sites where you've seen bed burials, but I think you've had other artefacts in the burial as well.
Yeah, no, we had a very nice site at Trumpington, just outside Cambridge, and that burial had spectacular finds with it. A gold and garnet pectoral cross, so one of these kind of nice cruciform designs. So we're starting to get associations from that burial, but also some of the other bed burials, that these are often associated with potentially high-status women.
And high-status women who were demonstrating their allegiance with Christianity?
There are 5 examples of these very distinct pectoral crosses. 2 of them are with bed burials, 1 of them is with St Cuthbert. You know, it's a real striking set of finds that you've got there. I think it has to be with those burials associated with Christianity.
Is there any way that being buried in a bed can be seen as part of that?
It's an interesting question. I mean, my sort of colleagues who study Anglo-Saxon literature will talk about links between verbs to sleep and to die that you start seeing come through the Christianised literature. I think it's definitely a possibility of what's actually going on at this time.
It may be that bed burials were seen as a clearly Christian burial practice, and wealthy women may have had a vital role in converting Britain to Christianity.
So is this telling us something interesting about gender and the spread of Christianity? Because I think we tend to think of the church as being incredibly male-dominated.
Not in the 7th century. For a lot of aristocratic women in this period, it offers an attractive and a viable alternative to marriage.
But at the same time, it's a way of them retaining their power.
Yeah. And it's a network that spreads across Europe as well. So women who are running monasteries in England have sisters who are running monasteries in the Frankish kingdoms. And so these networks of power are actually spreading across Western Europe at this time. And it's not until later on that women lose that place within the church.
The discovery of bed burials like this casts light on a vitally important but almost entirely forgotten part of our history, a network of powerful women who helped to introduce Christianity to ordinary Britons. And it's intriguing that for many of these women, Christianity offered not just a spiritual faith, but a chance to live their lives independently. One of the most important of these women lived here in Canterbury, Queen Bertha of Kent. 1400 years ago, she was very famous and influential, and one special treasure associated with her is kept here at Canterbury's Beanie Museum.
So tell me more about this particular pendant then and how it's made.
It's made of gold, and what they've done, they've built up the body of it and then they've inlaid garnets. None of this object is made of materials that can be sourced locally, but it's certainly made in East Kent. And I think that objects like this are made deliberately to be given out as gifts. So
really?
If a powerful man and woman, husband and wife, went to a feast and the king was present, he might gift the man with a jewelled sword belt, and he might gift the woman with a pendant or a brooch like this.
But we also know that Kentish queens could be as powerful, even more powerful, than Kentish kings.
So who was Queen Bertha?
Bertha was the wife of King Ethelbert of Kent. She was Frankish. Franks were the sort of superpower of Western Europe at that time. So she was Christian. Ethelbert, when they married, was still pagan. But she brought with her a bishop to Canterbury and was given St Martin's Church as a place to worship. Before the arrival of St Augustine, who brings the sort of mission from Rome to convert the English to Christianity, Bertha's already here in Canterbury.
With a bishop?
With a bishop, worshipping.
It sounds as though Bertha was powerful in her own right. She was marrying a king, but she's part of this other very important dynasty on the continent.
She is part of a much more powerful family. So Ethelbert had done very well to be married to Bertha, and she I'm sure, would have been, a formidable person, and in no way in his shadow.
From the powerful women like Bertha who spread Christianity, to the faithful who perhaps combined it with their pagan past, these incredible discoveries help to fill in big gaps in our knowledge. And they remind us that Christian practices didn't arrive as a package, and that they evolved over hundreds of years into the religion that we recognise today. In contrast to the countryside burial grounds, our next dig takes us into the city. To London's East End, where we're on the trail of one of Britain's most famous names. William Shakespeare is our greatest playwright, but the playhouses which employed him had a huge impact on his writing. And although we associate him with London's Globe Theatre, it's not the first venue that he wrote for.
Before the Globe, Shakespeare performed at an earlier playhouse, the Curtain, and it was this place that saw the premieres of some of his best-loved plays, including Romeo and Juliet.
But no one knew the precise location of the Curtain until 2011, when some building work revealed traces of the lost playhouse.
In the year that marked the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death, a team from Museum of London Archaeology excavated the Curtain. Not only were they hoping to uncover and preserve the remains of the playhouse, they also wanted to test ideas about how the architecture of the performance space might have influenced the plays that were written for it.
With layer upon layer of history piled up beneath London's streets, this is a complex dig for Heather Knight and her team.
We've got a lot going on with the archaeology within the space of 100 years. So in places we can have 3-4 metres of stratigraphy. That is quite a lot to sort through.
Despite the difficulties on site, the team have managed to reveal a key section of the playhouse.
This will form part of the back of the theatre, so you would have the galleries against it.
It's a great first find, but it also reveals something very surprising.
The big thing we found out is that, despite what a lot of people thought, that it was going to be polygonal, it's actually rectangular.
This shape is an important revelation. It would influence the style of theatre here.
So hopefully in a few weeks' time we'll really understand how this building worked. We'll understand the sizes and dimensions of the gallery space, the area of the yard where the audience would have been standing. We may get some evidence of the size of the stage.
Already the team can tell that the Curtain would have looked very different to polygonal or round theatres like the Globe. This was more like a typical Tudor inn. It was at the Curtain in the late 1590s that Shakespeare premiered two of his most famous works, Romeo and Juliet and Henry V. And as the dig continues, the team begin to build a vivid picture of what it might have been like to be there on the first night.
We've got these little beauties. These are the tops of money boxes. They're kind of a money box about this size. They'd be on top with a slit down the front. And as people are coming in to use the playhouse, they're depositing a penny to be able to come into the yard. Those money boxes were then taken back to the box office, which is where we get the term from, smashed, and the money is removed. Obviously, as they're smashed, we are looking to try and find the pieces of those that are being deposited, and luckily, at the bottom of these pits, we've managed to find a couple of pieces.
Judging by the rest of the finds, once the audience paid up, they were guaranteed a good time. As well as the live entertainment, they were drinking beer, smoking clay pipes and snacking on shellfish.
This was an afternoon of riot and fun, basically, from sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon all the way through till 6. Completely different, I think, from when we imagine, you know, when we go to see Shakespeare perform today. Completely different experience.
By week 8, the team have uncovered more of the building's structure. But they are struggling to find what they really want, the stage itself. Then, during the final week of the dig, they make a breakthrough. It appears that one section of the wall that they thought was a later addition is exactly what they've been looking for.
This wall that I've got my hand on has been with us for quite a while, and it actually could be, what I'm thinking at the moment, is it's the foundation for the front of the stage. So what they've done, in effect, is created a masonry shoebox, if you like, which they've then created the wooden stage on that masonry foundation.
At 14 metres wide and nearly 5 metres deep, the stage is far bigger than the team expected. Its discovery is helping them reconstruct for the very first time what the curtain may have looked like during its heyday. With a wide yard for the standing audience, 2 side galleries, and a large rectangular stage at the back of the playhouse.
So here we are in the, celebrating 400 years of Shakespeare, and it's quite thrilling to think that he was here performing on the stage that was just behind me.
So how do all these discoveries increase our understanding of Shakespeare's work? I've asked Heather to join me in the lab.
Must have felt pretty incredible digging that site and knowing that you were that close to Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Do you think the building itself would have influenced the playwrights and the types of plays being put on there?
When we think about the plays that we know from there, things like Henry V, Romeo and Juliet, you think of the sword fights that take place within those plays.
Is it a big enough stage, do you think?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it'd be, it's bigger than, say, the stage at the Rose.
Really?
And it's also bigger than the stage at the neighbouring theatre as well. So, yeah, it's quite a large space, I think.
So that does suggest that perhaps you'd have more opportunity for those type of ensemble scenes and possibly fight scenes as well.
That's right. You can get quite a few people on the stage at the same time. These questions that, we're posing, and hopefully we'll get some way to answering.
Rather wonderfully, the team have discovered a prop that could have been used in one of Romeo and Juliet's most famous scenes.
It looks a bit like an egg cup. I don't know if you can see, it's actually got a sort of a dimple in one side, and there's a slight hole in it, and that's where a rod has been passed through it, and that's to connect a spout, because it's a bird whistle. So you fill it with water, and then you blow down it, and it makes a sort of warbling noise.
Yeah.
So in the context of finding it just outside the playhouse, there's those questions of, is it related to performance? Are we seeing evidence of special effects?
Yes,
so when you think
song
of
in the background.
yeah, when you think of performances of, say, Romeo and Juliet, the Nightingale and the Lark that's mentioned, are they actually making birdsong to accompany that part of the play?
Heather thinks that the effect would have been similar to a modern novelty bird whistle.
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nightingale or a lark?
We'll decide, shall we?
Oh, yeah. Fantastic.
Just about. Maybe a lark, I think. Yeah.
It's one of those things we'll never know, isn't it?
No.
You know, I do rather like to imagine that might have been used in a performance of Romeo and Juliet back then. That's fantastic.
For the first time, archaeologists are able to suggest how the Curtain Theatre was a major influence on Shakespeare. Its large stage gave him the freedom to write the famous fight scenes in masterpieces like Henry V and Romeo and Juliet. Our final discovery takes us right back to the beginnings of England as a nation through an extraordinary find made near the village of Watlington in Oxfordshire. In the 9th century, England consisted of a number of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. They were ruled by powerful kings, some of whose predecessors had migrated to Britain from the continent in the 5th century. Their laws and language would lay the foundations for England. The most famous, of course, was Alfred the Great, King of Wessex.
In the 870s AD, Alfred was defending his Anglo-Saxon kingdom against rampaging Vikings. He emerged victorious, a hero, and his place in the history books was cemented. But a recently discovered hoard of coins reveals another side to this story.
It suggests that Alfred may get too much credit for beating back the Vikings. In late 2015, James Mather was detecting a field near Watlington and not having much luck.
I'd been out detecting for about 5 hours and unfortunately I hadn't found very much. When I noticed a patch of high ground, which I hadn't detected on before, well, not long after I'd started detecting there, I received a really good signal. And digging down about 6 or 7 inches, I found a small, about 6 centimetre long silver ingot. It looked like a squash cigar, and I'd never found anything like that before.
James later realised that this was a Viking ingot, a solid block of silver used as currency. It's a rare find for southern England.
Digging down, I found a hammered silver coin, which I immediately recognised was either Viking or Anglo-Saxon. So I carried on very, very carefully scraping the soil away with my hand, and I exposed a mass of silver coins. And at that point in time, I realised I'd found something really special.
James got in touch with the Portable Antiquities Scheme, the organisation that helps to report and interpret metal detecting discoveries. The professionals decided to lift the hoard in one large block to protect the coins. And then it was sent to the British Museum, where specialist conservator Pippa Pearce began the painstaking task of removing the individual treasures from the soil.
It's a very greasy clay. It doesn't shift very easily, it doesn't brush, it clogs the brushes pretty well immediately.
As the conservators work their way deeper into the hoard, they discover multiple treasures, Viking bracelets and silver ingots. Finally, they're ready to examine the coins in more detail. They soon identify a name.
So they've got an Alfred with an E, E-L-F-R-E-D.
These coins date to just after Alfred's decisive victory over the Vikings at the Battle of Edington in 878. The defeated Viking forces may well have buried the hoard as they retreated back to their own territory, expecting one day to return. But as the team dig deeper into the hoard, they notice something entirely unexpected. It's not just King Alfred's name on the coins.
Very much like to get this one out whole. There's a coin of Cornwall. You can see the O and the L and the W. Wolf is coming out intact. We're getting 2 people on the coins. One of them is Alfred the Great, and the other one is someone called Wolf, who is described by the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle as a foolish thane.
The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is a history of England started during Alfred's reign. This reference to Ceolwulf is doubly insulting. Not only is he foolish, he's a thane, an insignificant minor nobleman. But these coins prove that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is wrong. Ceolwulf was a king. At the end of the conservation process, the team discovers something really interesting. A coin depicting two rulers sitting beneath a symbol for unity. It suggests that Alfred and Ceolwulf had formed an alliance to fight the Vikings. But why have we never heard about this before? Coin specialist John Naylor has joined me in the lab.
What a wonderful find. This is a really curious image on this coin. I mean, does that suggest that you've got two kings of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms at this time, ruling together?
It's very possible. But the fact that it's happening at exactly the point that the two remaining Anglo-Saxon kingdoms are under great threat, so suggesting that it is an alliance between the two kings represented on a coin is very likely.
Ceolwulf's Mercia and Alfred's Wessex were the only kingdoms to successfully resist the Vikings. This evidence isn't just a new revelation, it makes sense. Their alliance gave them the strength to fight back.
So what happens to Ceolwulf then? Because we don't really hear any more about him.
We don't really know. There's no record of when he died, why he died, where he was buried. So he literally just disappears from history.
After that, Alfred took over Ceolwulf's lands and airbrushed him from the records.
This does, I think, paint a bit of a different picture of Alfred than the one we're normally used to, where he is the great and the good. You're seeing him a bit more as a politician here. He's positioning himself as essentially this emperor of the Anglo-Saxons.
Yes, well, the documents do show him in a glowing light, and he's the only king we have known as the Great in this country. He may well have been a very pious king and a very good king, but he was also a typical early medieval ruler who took the political advantage that he could.
Alfred the Great and the wily.
Indeed.
This hoard is transforming the story of how Britain beat back the Vikings. It really is an incredible find. It's providing us with a more nuanced portrait of Alfred and slotting a forgotten king back into our history books. But no one could keep the Vikings out forever. This year marks the 1,000-year anniversary of the Viking conquest of Britain in 1016. And here in Canterbury's Heritage Museum, there's a secret weapon that was instrumental to their victory.
Craig, you've promised to show me some of the most precious artefacts in the museum, and there's a rusty stirrup.
This is a rare Viking stirrup made of iron from the early 11th century.
OK, so I don't usually think of the Vikings being horsemen.
No. Well, I guess in the earlier times they were raiding, so they were in and out quickly, but by the early 11th century there were large armies of Vikings trying to conquer the whole country. Obviously, moving large armies requires quite a lot of horses, so they were developing technologies that allowed them to move around the countryside more easily.
So how do you know that this is definitely Viking and not Anglo-Saxon?
Well, most of the research seems to say that the Saxons weren't using iron stirrups at this point.
Right.
So it's a Danish technology, so the iron is important because you can put more force into riding. So if you hit the enemy whilst your foot is in an iron stirrup, you've got the whole force of a horse and you. So this led on to heavy cavalry, and the knights of the Middle Ages were directly in line from this technology.
That's a really interesting story to come out of just one object.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary to discover that this simple stirrup technology played such an important part in the Viking conquest of Britain. Finds like these show how archaeology can change the story of Britain. The discoveries from 2016 have been more impressive than ever.
Certainly the largest in situ collection of Roman sling bullets.
This is as if the British have captured the German trenches and then they have to dig in facing German counterattack from up the hill.
See, I'm starting to go on flights of fancy now, and to me, this is where King Arthur lived. They've allowed us to reach out and touch our ancestors' lives.
They have a kind of bulbous, very round head.
It's heavy.